everyone could see them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And Jay,
Great.
is that
Let me
maybe
back out and see if I can do that.
okay? Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Noah, this is Rick. Can you let me know next time you have a council virtual meeting?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll make sure to send that out to you.
Thanks.
No problem.
Awesome. All right, should we go ahead and call to order?
We're recording it live on YouTube, so go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So calling to order at 7:01. Thank you for everybody for being here, for joining us, and especially to our attendees. It's always nice to have a larger crowd. Traditionally, we start with an opportunity for the public to address the board. And I did just want to give a quick heads up that we are going to reorder the agenda a little bit with the acceptance of the board, so that we can move the discussion of the survey results and some of the discussion around grading and such up in the agenda. So we're going to do agenda review in just a second, but as I have the public address the board, I just wanted to say if there are members of the public who would like to address the board on a matter that's already on the agenda, we're going to ask that you wait until that moment in the agenda. So that would include, at this point, discussion of HHS grading and any curriculum questions, etc., related to the high school, since that's going to be part of our agenda. So at this time, are there members of the public who would like to address the board on any matter not already on the agenda? And I see a hand up from Jennifer Chambers. Josh, do you have a way to help us with that? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Josh.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. I think you can.
Okay.
Thank you for everything you're all doing during this really difficult time. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the music department and ask that you consider being willing to let us record student performances of performances and make that accessible to students and families to share. I understand why we're not able to record some of the Zoom meetings right now in real time for a variety of reasons that really protect the safety of the students. That makes an enormous amount of sense. And my request is that for things like finished products that obviously following copyright law are allowed to be released, we'd like to be able to have our students share finished virtual choirs, jazz band performances, things such as that with the public if possible.
All right, thank you, Jenny. And I don't know, so typically we don't respond to that, to public comment at this point. However, if someone does have a quick response to that in terms of legal opinion, or if there is an easy response, we could probably do that really quickly. Otherwise, I think we'll just take it into consideration, and hopefully the administration can work through that. Definitely understand the reasons behind that request. And I've gotten to see some of the work through internal channels, and they are just doing amazing things. So understand that, the reasons for that request. Anyone else from the public who would like to comment on something not on the agenda at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to agenda review. And as I mentioned, I would like to move F, remote learning survey, student and parent feedback, up to the first item in business requiring discussion. So partly because it will flow logically, I think, from report of council and report of our principals. And then after that, we will be able to open up public discussion and board discussion of any items related to that topic. Is there anything else that board members would like to reorder in the agenda? Jay?
I'd just simply like to request the addition of an item to non-public on a student matter.
Okay.
We have a request for a best interest placement from a neighboring district, and I'd like to present that to the board then.
Okay. Board members head nod, yes. Okay, super. And then the only other thing that we do need to add is in the business requiring action, we will be adding a vote to approve the recommendation of the superintendent regarding grading throughout the district. Is that correct, Jay?
For HHS specifically tonight.
For HHS specifically tonight, okay. So we'll add that under business requiring action. Okay. Anything else? Awesome. Moving right along then to Noah, report from HHS Council.
Hello, everyone. I'm Noah Phipps. I'm the Dresden School Board representative on Hanover High School's council. And we held our first ever virtual council meeting on Zoom last Wednesday. The meeting was a success, and we are hopeful that council can continue to meet weekly and work through its agenda online. Council has also moved its elections online this year, and we will be running our elections on Friday, May 8th. During our council meeting last Wednesday, we discussed Credit Plus grading. And council is opposed to including Credit Plus grading during second semester of this year. At the end of our meeting, we took an informal vote through the raise hand option on Zoom, and 33 of the 36 council members attending raised their hand to oppose the Credit Plus option in Dr. Badham's initial proposal. Council members agreed that the Credit Plus edition would add stress for students and teachers while not accurately representing student performance. And this is why council does not support the Credit Plus option. Thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
Yeah, Jay.
Thank you. And I just wanted to let you know that I have attached the minutes under public content for your report. So those of you who haven't refreshed, you'll have to do so in order to see them.
Oh, yep, I see them there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Sure.
Anyone else have a question for Noah? Dan?
Hi, Noah. I'm curious, what were the main stressors around the Credit Plus option?
So I think one of the largest stresses, speaking from looking over the minutes, was that Credit Plus is somewhat of a nebulous concept, at least to students and teachers. Some teachers expressed difficulty with trying to decide what student work would be considered simply credit and what student work would be considered Credit Plus. And students felt that they would have very high levels of stress trying to put in extra work, having to communicate extra with teachers in order to make sure that they would be able to reach that Credit Plus. Students felt that this is already a very stressful time. And so adding an additional goal for students to reach, especially one that is not clearly defined, would be very challenging for students.
Okay. I'm curious just about the conversation that was in the room where I mean, council is a kind of self-selected subset in some way, were students feeling like they were engaged generally in schoolwork and that they didn't need, I mean, I think at least part of the initial rationale around the plus, to be honest, wasn't so much to distinguish work as to distinguish engagement. I mean, so here's a nebulous question. I mean, did you feel like the council, like the students on council, felt engaged in their classwork, that they were doing it and that they didn't need, or they didn't want this extra thing to have to aspire to?
I think the council members definitely felt engaged in their classes, and I think they viewed Credit Plus less of an added incentive to engage and more of a challenge for students who are already having trouble engaging, whether it be through technology problems or family challenges brought on by the coronavirus. And so they felt that instead of that, the Credit Plus option would not kind of empower students to challenge themselves further to get to that Credit Plus option. They felt that it might be a challenge where students are already challenged trying to make simply the credit option, that it was adding one more step, one more level when students are working really hard and already finding problems just trying to be engaged in the regular material.
And when you say students, did you, I mean, so did you canvass the school, or does students mean council?
So all of the opinions expressed during our council meeting came from council members and from stories that they had heard from other students. We did open up the council meeting. All council meetings are public. And
Sure.
this one, we sent out the Zoom link to the whole school to hear any feedback that the school as a whole had.
And when you send the link out to the students, and when I guess you're going to do this in the future, do you give them an agenda? Do they know what's being discussed?
Yep, we send them a Zoom link on Schoology as well as the agenda of what we are planning to discuss.
Okay, great. Thank you, Noah.
No problem.
Thanks, Noah. And I will just say, I know we all value the student leadership that you guys are providing. So thank you for the time and energy that you're putting into that. Yeah, Jay.
Noah, one of my intentions in offering that plus option, which really was meant to be honoring the teacher's recommendation for credit, no credit, but to provide an additional option that would hopefully preserve or at least address issues and concerns about equity. The idea was that it could be used as more of an effort grade, as well as Dan mentioned engagement. I'd use the two almost synonymously, but and it's my understanding that part of the discussion that council had was about how we would know whether students were experiencing adverse conditions. Was that something that you did talk about?
Yeah, so one of the things council members brought up was because Credit Plus is as you mentioned, an effort grade, the effort someone puts in will not be equal to the effort someone else may put in, but they may still receive the same grade. And looking at the minutes, one person mentioned that, and I'm paraphrasing here, it is impossible to fairly recognize efforts despite adverse circumstances because it puts a burden on teachers it puts a burden on students to remind teachers why they have certain difficulties, and no one wants to be in the uncomfortable situation. For example, they probably don't want to tell others that a parent has lost a job. And they also mentioned that it is also vague where to draw the line at adversity and effort.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. Jay, anything to add to that, or should I?
No, I just wanted to make sure
okay.
that was, because that had been relayed to me indirectly, and I wanted to make sure that had actually been discussed.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Lisa?
Yeah, Noah, not that I'm advocating for Credit Plus, but I'm kind of like Dan, a little curious about some of the discussion. And you said that one of the reasons that people didn't want Credit Plus is that they felt some students would get the same grade for differing amounts of effort. Or they would receive the same mark. I guess I wouldn't use grade for different amounts of effort. Wouldn't you say that happens anyway with an A, B, C, D grading scale?
So when I mentioned different effort levels for the same grade, I think I worded it poorly. I was really trying to address that different effort levels would come from extenuating circumstances like access to internet and the family situation. So I would say that in our current system or the system from first semester using letter grades, that different students' efforts would lead to that students who put in different efforts may get the same grade. But I think what I'm trying to express here and trying to express council's position is that during this time, effort is so widely affected by the circumstances in quarantine that it's really challenging to grade based on effort. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I just was caught off guard because it feels as if one of the complaints I hear is that some kids slack in a class and they get the same A that I got. And so that phrasing just caught me. And then I just had one other question. Did you all discuss, or were you at all concerned that a credit no credit system, or pass fail, or whatever we're calling it, would cause students to slack off? And if so, did you have any ideas around that, or are you just not going to worry about it and we're just going to plow through?
So that was brought up during our discussion, and we felt it's at any system is challenging to really incentivize learning, but a lot of people felt that without the pressure of grades, without the pressure of credit plus, and I'm reading from the minutes here, people would actually start learning for the sake of learning. And some council members expressed that without having to strive for a credit plus in every class, it would allow students to dig deeper into the material and really just enjoy the learning process.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification, and I really, I hope that is the outcome of this experiment. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any other questions for Noah, knowing that we are going to then hear from both Tim and Justin and also the survey results? Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, not a question. I just want to point out, Noah, really well done. I definitely appreciate your diligence and your hard work on this. I know this is probably the most questions you've been asked in one of these meetings, and I think you handled yourself like a rock star. Well done.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Wholeheartedly agree. Any other questions or accolades for Noah? All right. Thank you so much, Noah. And I did just want to pause to point out to anyone who's listening on YouTube, if you want to participate, there is a separate Zoom link that is available on Board Docs. So if you go to the Board Docs, which you can find on the SAU 70 website or the SAU 70 calendar, then you can get into the Zoom, which will allow you to be one of our Zoom attendees and participate in the conversation. So just wanted to point that out. You're also welcome to just follow along on YouTube. Okay, so moving along to reports from our principals. I'm not sure, Tim and Justin, what the right order for this is. Maybe start with Tim and then move to Justin so we can also talk about the surveys, if that makes sense. Okay, super.
That'll work. It's been a long time. I can't believe it's been a long time since we're at the school board meeting. Certainly many things have changed. The last meeting we had just sort of started to figure out what we were going to do in remote learning. I did want to recognize that sort of the last all school function that we had before we went to remote learning was we had staff training and a parent outreach night from the group at Outright Vermont, who worked with staff and with parents about equity issues surrounding our LGBTQ plus students in middle school. And I think it was a very successful and uplifting training, realizing that there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we have a lot of people who were willing to put in that work. So that was a good way to sort of move into remote learning. Remote learning has been, it's been a whirlwind. We started at the very beginning at the middle school because we're in that sort of, we've talked about it a great deal at the leadership meeting, that the middle school is sort of in a very sweet spot in that our students are independent enough so that they can do work on their own. And yet they're not in classes where grades are going to be scrutinized going forward. So there's a lot more flexibility and freedom that is offered to our students. So we tried to take advantage of that. The whole plan for remote learning from the Richmond School was to stress contact over content, so that we're trying to make sure that students are meeting with as many different people on a weekly basis as they can. The bare minimum would be that people have students that they're supposed to check in with from their homeroom at least twice a week. Assignments are posted on Monday morning. They're given on a weekly basis, not on a daily basis. Understanding some, and we've had a couple of parent meetings since then. Some parents would really like it to be a very structured setup so that everybody knew exactly what they were supposed to do all the way through the day. In talking to parents and in getting a lot of feedback from parents and just in the community, we know that it's not possible for everyone to do that. So it just raises the stress on the people who can't. So we tried basically to say, here are the things that we would like you to do this week. And please, really the stress is to have contact with your teachers about any questions that you have, and any freedom that you might want to do. So we have had a couple of students who have gone in one direction or another. We have team meetings on a regular basis, and the number of times you'll have, the social studies and the English teacher will say, well, I haven't seen this student. And the science teacher will say, well, I see that student all day, every day. All they're doing is science, which is fine. It's one of the pluses we have in the middle school, is that we can take what people have decided they want to do and run with it. We have two students, two siblings who had been ill and had gotten better and had just decided that they didn't necessarily want to follow the curriculum that was out there strictly. So they came up with an independent project and talked to their teachers about it. And now they're redoing a barn on their property, complete with architectural drawings and measurements and all kinds of other things that they're getting done. And then they're writing things up journal wise to give to their teachers so that we can keep track of it. And hopefully we'll have a good photo journalistic session that we can then pass on to everybody afterwards. So that's really where we are in terms of the remote learning. We're trying to be as flexible and as fluid as we can and really stress contacting people on a regular basis. We've had parent meetings. We've had a couple now. We have them every 2 weeks, just as sort of a check-in. Other than that, I really wanted to publicly thank all of the teachers who've been doing incredible amounts of work and the time that they've been putting in. I could, run down the entire list, but I think especially I want to point out the learning specialists and our 504 coordinator at the Richmond School, who have basically been teaching individual classes to individual students every day since we've gone into remote learning. So they're basically on one-on-one Zoom meetings from 8 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, just flat out with all these students to make sure that they're able to keep up and are getting all the services that they need. Trying to think of, we're in the process of closing up the school, which is very strange in April, having people come in and try to get everything ready so that our custodians can clean the building very deeply, which if you know our head custodian, he's just giddy about that he has extra time to do extra cleaning. He's very happy. Ray is about that. He's not happy about everybody leaving, but it's fine. We cleaned out all the cubbies. We've sending home woodworking projects. It's a very bizarre time. But other than that, we're planning for the end of the year to see what we can do. We're hoping for a little bit, see if our social distancing is going to stay the same or if it's going to change a little bit. And so we have a number of different options that we're working for there, but we're going to work with student council and parents and other groups to see what would be the most meaningful for our 8th graders, because they're really driving this ship at this point. We have written, we reached out to Friends of Hanover Norwich Schools today. We have a number of people who are asking about circulating books from the library. And we have a situation where it's a little unclear as to how safe circulating books from a library is. And some people were nervous about it. So we've asked Friends of Hanover Norwich Schools to purchase some books, which we can then just go ahead and we're going to try to purchase books from the Norwich bookstore so we can keep things local and send those to students who need them, who have read all of the books in their house already, which I'm sure could happen given the amount of stuff some of our people read. So that's where we are. And a lot of Zoom interviews for positions we have next year, but that's now par for the course. It would have been novel and cool last year to do a lot of Zoom interviews. Now it's, yeah, just one more thing we're doing. So that's where we are. And thank you guys or thank everybody here for all the leadership you've shown too. I think, you know, Justin may say the same thing, but I have friends all over the country who are trying to navigate this in schools, and they are having a much more difficult time of it than we are, which is not to say it's easy what we're doing, but it has been made a lot easier in this situation. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. So I am going to take questions now for Tim, since I think after that we'll probably transition to talking about the high school. So are there questions for Tim and the middle school at this point? I want to make sure I see Julie's joined us. Welcome, Julie. I want to make sure I'm not ignoring Anissa. She's not on, right? No? Okay, super.
It's Anissa's birthday. So
oh, happy birthday.
she had said a long time ago that she was not coming tonight.
She gets a free pass for sure. All right, any questions for Tim? And attendees, if you have questions for the middle school, please feel free to voice them as well. Okay, I see none from the board. All right. Oh, I see Jennifer Chambers.
I know it's not a question, and so I apologize for that. But what I do want to say is that our family is, and as a teacher and a parent in the district, has been so deeply grateful for the leadership and the communication and the attention to detail that Tim Boyle has given to the middle school, with only working there for such a short amount of time, and then having to go through a pandemic in our district. So I do want to mention that we're so deeply grateful for his leadership and for the staff and everything they've done for the students there. Having 2 children there that are.
Oh, Jenny, I think we may have lost you there at the end. Can you hear us? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tom?
I'd like to finish what I think Jennifer Chambers was saying.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Of a 7th
Yes.
grader.
Okay,
Oh, there
we
she
can carry on. We're
All right, Jen.
just appreciative, Kelly.
Okay, thank you so much. Tom, I don't know if you want to pick up. Thank you so much, Jen.
Reiterate what Jennifer was saying. So thanks, Tim, as a parent of a 7th grader. I appreciate it. And someone who's been able to call into some of those parent Zooms, as well as the new PTO Zooms. I appreciate that as well. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed kind of lurking on Schoology and seeing some of the group yoga and group banana split making, and I'm thinking, can I join some of those? They sound like fun.
I will say, yes, you can join. We have people who are joining all over the place. So they were, Liz and Katie were making cookies today, and I know that there were a number of parents who joined in. So please feel free.
Thanks. Other questions for Tim? I see a hand raised somewhere in the panelists. Dan, sorry, I don't know why I didn't see you, Dan. I apologize.
I'm just piling on in a good way, Tim. It's been a lot of fun hanging out in my girls' classes every once in a while. I was listening to Shayna do a chemistry experiment today with Mr. H, and it was totally awesome. The kids were really excited, and anyway, it's just been fun watching them. They have a good day every day generally. So, and thanks. I also appreciate the emails.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Tim? I'm just trying to see if I see hands waving. No. Okay. So let's go ahead and move over to Justin and Julie. And if you guys want to kind of roll in the survey results as part of your report, feel free. We can kind of morph into that portion of the discussion as well.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I would also echo what Tim said and just thank the entire staff for their hard work. I too could probably list everyone, but in addition to the groups that Tim singled out, I would point to the tech department. We've actually recruited some additional ed assistants and others to assist with our tech department, but their efforts have just been amazing, from troubleshooting all of the many issues that have come up and really keeping things moving. I know there's a number of things we want to talk about relative to HHS and some of our feedback. So I'm just going to speak about a bit of that, and then I'm happy to field any questions that you have. One thing I wanted to mention relative to grading is our staff. The Hanover High School staff, we're a democratic school, as I know you're familiar with, and it's rare that we reach a unanimous position on just about anything. We're really great at debating. We have lots of strongly held opinions. But in this case, the staff, when we voted by department, we were unanimous that we were in favor of a credit, no credit option. In addition, I'm aware that there's we've been getting feedback really on all sides of these issues, but also there's been some discussions ongoing relative to our approach and our curricula going forward and how we're handling it during a shutdown. So I just wanted to give a bit of our context. And I begin by saying that we absolutely are a school that we want your feedback. So I mean that genuinely. I want to hear from you. Our entire staff wants what's best for our kids, as I'm sure every staff and every building does. But I think there are a few things that are a little bit different about our context that perhaps have influenced our choices so far. And again, I hopefully will end where I began, in that we definitely want your feedback. One thing that's somewhat unique about our school is that we're quite a bit bigger than some of the other schools. So many of these conversations have been grounded in, folks that have students in all of the schools, and there's wonderful things happening in all places. But the high school is quite a bit bigger. We have 95 teaching staff, people not FTEs, and 185 total staff, 730-ish students, 240 courses, and over 800 sections. So just with added size comes some complication. And additionally, in our student body, that the makeup of our student body is a little bit different than the other schools, and that we have, depending on when you look, somewhere around 135 tuition students from about a dozen towns. Many of those towns add variability in our access to internet, et cetera. So that's I think one place that our student body at the high school is a bit different than some of the other schools that come primarily from our two home district towns. There's a number of other commitments that are coming up in really pretty big numbers right now. We have a fair chunk of high school students who are caring for siblings and have other things going on in their lives that makes kind of the regular school day schedule particularly complicated for adolescents and for people in that teenage area. For our staff, kind of in the other commitments area, our teachers have kind of 3 to 4 preps or unique classes they're delivering, and somewhere around 80 to 100 students. Those are full-time teachers. Additionally, many of our staff coach an athletic sport or are advising a club. And I think, at first blush, you might think those things are things that can be let go of to some degree. But really maybe getting at something that Tim said earlier about that contact over content. Some of those areas, the environmental club still planning to, in some way, plant our garden and donate the produce to the Haven over the summer. Those amazing projects are still happening and take staff time. And then I'll get to kind of the last chunk, and I would say that our grading discussion really, I think, points to a place where there's a different focus and priority, rightly or wrongly, on high school grades and college and the SAT, the SAT2, the AP, credits that are earned. And then, I wrote down in my notes for myself in capital letters, content, because we too, in those conversations as a high school staff, we care deeply about our students, and our Common Ground teachers are reaching out to their students every single week to make contact. But I know our teachers are still very much feeling attached to their specific curricula, and like there are these outside forces that are pushing us to want to make it through content so that students are well prepared for college, are well prepared to sit for the SATs, et cetera. I spent somewhere between 6 and 8 hours this weekend doing electronic walkthroughs, I'm going to call them, of our staff. And so diving into Schoology and talking with students, as I always do, but in preparation for this meeting, a real focused effort in that area. I talked with a science teacher about the small group assessment that she was doing with her 9th grade students, pulling them together in smaller groups, clumped by their schedule, quite honestly. So she was spending the whole day trying to meet with her students and grouping them. She had this really delightful assessment set up. So it was a verbal back and forth with the teacher, really getting at what they know, and the 3 to 4 students were working together. But it was very much non-trivial to find times when students could be pulled together. And quite honestly, the theme for me, that Jenny Chambers mentioned, the performances that we'd love to be able to release more broadly. But the theme for me really is, as the more I look and the more I dig, the more I'm impressed with what's happening at the high school. And certainly, I'll own any and all miscommunication if I need to communicate more regularly or send more regular emails. Happy to do it about the amazing things that are happening. I'm almost done, so I'm conscious of everyone's time. But for us in our population, sort of synchronous learning, as wonderful as that's what we want. That's why our staff is in education. They want to work directly with students. But for large groups, I would say we at the high school are finding it fairly challenging to pull together our classes in a sort of a Zoom version of an ordinary class. There's a lot going on for them, but there's definitely many dozens of students who, for reasons of technology, in our home district, in Etna certainly, but also in many of the other towns that we have, technological access is challenging. Students are caring for siblings and or other family members. And RSA and policy prevent us from recording those synchronous sessions as kind of a fallback. So synchronous learning is complicated. I'll end where I began, in that we absolutely are a school that values our community's feedback, and I mean that. So there's, I know many of our staff are attendees as well, and I think there's no defensiveness. We want to hear your thoughts, and one thought I have is, I appreciate that the middle school has been able to focus on contact versus content. And I wonder if that would be an acceptable direction for the high school. The grading conversation and other things lead me to question that. I think that's what many of our teachers would love to do. They'd love to be spending their time with, not abandoning in any way the curricula, but maybe pointing a bit away from that and focusing a bit more on the student contact. But at high school, sometimes that can be viewed a bit differently as we're preparing for college and everything else. So happy to take your questions and absolutely take notes. I am taking notes, and happy to use any of that feedback to improve our distance learning at the high school. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. I see that Dan has a question. I am wondering, and Dan, you can tell me what you think too. And Justin, I'm wondering if it makes sense to go on into the survey responses, or if we should pause now for questions. What do you think? Dan, are you okay pausing on your question?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
And actually, I mean, and I don't know, maybe since we postponed the public, right? Because some of them might want to weigh in.
Oh yeah, I
probably go to them first anyway.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kelly.
Justin, is that okay with you if we kind of roll right into that first
Absolutely.
discussion item? Okay.
Yeah, whatever works for you guys.
I think that may answer some questions that people have, or some, additional information gathering people would be interested in. So maybe we could move on into that one. And just to double check, Jay, those results are now available again in the public section, right?
They've been properly redacted and have been put back on the public side.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. So for anyone watching in the public, you can access those survey summaries on board docs. Okay, so Justin or Julie, I'm not sure who's taken this one, but.
The data's out there, where our intent with the surveys right from the beginning is to do bi-weekly surveys, at least for a while. At some point that will probably end as the year wraps up. But we've been meeting, the high school staff meets together twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. In addition, departments are meeting regularly. Our pupil service team continues to meet. And I think as all the other schools probably are in exactly the same position, we're using that information and really all the information we're getting to share with each other our best practices and to make sure we're continuing to improve our methods of instruction and our delivery in this novel time. And happy to field any questions there are about the survey data.
And just for the public's benefit, since I know there, people may not have had a chance to look at the whole thing. Just, there are some percentages in terms of how many hours of work do you have per day? Do you feel like you're getting what you need, et cetera? And then there's quite a lengthy open-ended response, and people clearly took a lot of time to answer that. So if you have a chance to look through it, please do, and please feel free to answer or ask any questions about that. And thank you to everyone who did take the time to fill that out. It's quite informative. Jay?
Sure. I'll ask a question to begin. I read through every open-ended response for students and parents for both administrations of the survey. And one thing that I noted in the first go-round was a perception on the part of the students and from the parents of inconsistency in terms of workload. I didn't do a sort of a quantitative analysis of the responses. Do you have a sense that there was actual work undertaken as a result of the feedback from the first survey? And where are we headed in future surveys? Is this feedback going to be used to modify what's being done?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of work was done on that area. I think in full disclosure, I think that's a theme that has certainly popped up in the past, in non-COVID related feedback as well. But we had a number of departments that really dug into that, and I was part of several efforts working with individual teachers, et cetera. I would say, and these are now redacted, but I think in some context, there was a lot of identifying information that we could use to really work on specific situations. Oftentimes, as you'd imagine, those are our courses that are taught by a wide variety of teachers, a large number of teachers. And so we were able to work with some of those teams, and I hope that those issues are that there's been improvement, and we would continue. The idea is absolutely to continue this as an iterative process. The more feedback we have, we would be able to use that data to continue to push along. And I'd advocate, our number of responses is relatively low. So I'd love to build that up. I think I've probably received as many direct email feedback as there are in those surveys, quite honestly. So that feedback also that we're all receiving, all members of our staff, is part of the conversation as well.
Always forget I'm muted. Dan, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. So Justin, thanks for all you're doing. I know it's a difficult time. That said, I do want to push back a tiny bit in terms of, organizing stuff and moving parts. It's anecdote, but I have a friend who teaches. He's a history teacher in a public school in Dutchess County, New York, which is not so different as a community as we have, or some of those communities. Anyway, it's rural. It's a large school. It's 3,000 students and about 200 faculty. And my friend has 4 preps, 2 AP and 2 other classes. And I'm not saying I'm striving for the following, but just as comparison, he's pretty much on Zoom from 9 to 3. He's meeting all his classes, and and actually there's a much broader socioeconomic spread that he's dealing with, and all the same kinds of rural access and things like that. I actually don't see it as an either or thing, like whatever, contact versus content thing. I think that there's a middle ground. Anecdotally around here, I do know that there are a fair number of students, some who for various reasons feel quite isolated now. Different families have different feelings about social distancing and about whether or not, kids can see their friends or not. Some kids are seeing their friends. Some kids just aren't for various reasons. Some kids are only children and not seeing their friends, and it's pretty terrible. I know from my own high schooler that even though driver's ed isn't his favorite thing, I'm now saying that in public, he's actually enjoying it, I think, because he's in a classroom for 2 hours, a Zoom classroom with his friends. And there's something quite comforting about that. I don't, scheduling is complicated. I totally agree. And we see in some of the responses that, students are like, why is this class meeting at the same time as this other class? I want to, I don't know where I should be. You do have more moving parts than the middle school and the Ray school. The Ray school's using the simple Google Doc as an organizing conceit for their classes. All the teachers are saying when in fact their classes are, and they're, and again, fewer moving parts, no electives, all that stuff, I get it. But that said, I mean, I don't know how we're organizing stuff. I don't want to dump it all. I wouldn't want to dump it all on you. We do have department coordinators, the hierarchical, we have a hierarchical structure exactly because we need to offload some of the stuff from the top, right? So I could imagine a structure where the coordinators are coordinating within their own disciplines. And then, you and Julie or someone are, that there's some aggregating that's going on, and perhaps to the end of having, let's say, 2 basically contact, and they don't even have to be hours, it's like a half hour, twice a week where you just see your friends. Maybe you talk about, you talk about the subject, you talk about whatever it is. I mean, it's up to the teacher. And then there's an office hour or something, which is more related to the assignments. I mean, I'm totally spitballing here. I'm not, even the college isn't a great sort of, it's clear it's not the right analogy, but I do know that there the same thing is happening. The students are enjoying seeing community in their classrooms, and the actual pedagogy is, I mean, it's all over the place. Some of it's recorded, some of it is one-to-one. It's kind of, but the actual classroom experience in small classrooms, what the students like is that they see their friends. So there's some mixing and matching that I think would have to go on here. Sorry for the monologue. I mean, the other thing I want to say about that is that I kind of hate to say it, but this is probably not the last time we're going to have to do this. I know you won't be here, but it's, putting some structure in place for emergencies that require the public schools to go online. We haven't had to do it, and now we're doing it. And we should be using this as an opportunity to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And even if it's right up to the end of the year, just to have this kind of disaster planning in place. I don't mean to raise the specter of anything awful in the fall for folks, but anybody who's been reading the newspaper knows it's not a slam dunk about what's going to happen in the fall. Truth is that our students are probably less at risk than our faculty and our staff.
Yeah, well said.
So it's not, it just isn't at all clear right now, I think, what the learning environment is. The probabilities are in our favor, but it's not clear. And so we should be viewing this as a time to road test some possibilities for the fall. And then I think the last thing I just want to say, and then I'll shut up really, is curricularly, my main concern is the synchronization of the curriculum for this year with the curriculum for next year. It's probably most relevant in the language classes and in the math classes, where you assume that students have done something last year and then they start, they end here and they start there in year 2. And that has significant effects, this kind of matching problem. And so I'd like to know what we're doing about that. So I hope that in this speech, that the main points didn't get lost, which is that I honestly think that all the classes should meet once or twice a week so that the kids can see their friends. And I think we need to be concerned about the synchronization piece. And I think we really need to be taking stock of what we're learning that works and doesn't work for, God forbid, the next time that this has to happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Justin, if you want to, that was a lot. If you
Yeah.
want to respond to any of that. No, thanks, Dan.
No, certainly. So, I'll take the last part first. We're very much actively working with the leadership team to think about how we do the end of the year. And specifically, might there be a way at the end of the year, and then potentially many schools are talking about doing something unique at the beginning of the year, exactly to synchronize, as Dan was saying, the place, especially in those classes, foreign language and math, that build on one another. We will be in a different spot. Our students will be in a different spot than they ordinarily would be. And so we will have to adjust curricula and or do remediation, et cetera. So, I agree completely, and we have our eyes on that. I can't comment on what other schools are doing other places, but certainly I'm tied into national organizations and state organizations. So, I'm familiar with what's going on at many dozens of other schools. I'm a commissioner on the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And so they've sent out surveys and I've read them all. So I think my N is quite large in that area. I know what other schools are doing, and I think it's safe to say what we're experiencing here is really definitely these challenges are being experienced other places. We as a staff are struggling, we as a community are struggling to know how we should grade and assess students. We don't yet know when our last day of school is. And so I will absolutely own any and all organization that we could have done a better job of. I think, Dan, your suggestion of 1 or 2 times a week that classes meet, that's happening. Maybe not on, again, if you look at any individual student, and certainly course section, could that not happen sometimes? Absolutely. But I think it's happening maybe differently than you imagine at the high school. And specifically, we have enough students that are unable to meet that we've really thought about, there's a concept in EduSpeak called universal design for learning, and how you structure things, thinking about students that need extra supports. You think about that in the beginning, and you build those supports in for all students. We have enough students that, if you say this, course X is meeting Tuesday at 8 o'clock, on the one hand, that's pretty easy to organize. We have calendars. We absolutely have, Zoom calendars and other things that other schools are doing. We have enough students who can't be there that we asked ourselves the question, do we want to design these regular synchronous learning experiences when 10%, 20%, some percentage of students can't be there, and therefore we're self-selecting and sorting our students in that way? And our answer was no. Is that the right answer? I'm not sure. If we could free ourselves up from recording, there's lots of questions we're asking about how we could have done things better. And quite honestly, Dan, I agree with your main points. I think, that those we're social beings, and that those learning experiences we have with others, I think likely to a person, you'd hear that our staff also thrive on those experiences. As you experienced from a staff member earlier tonight who lives in our district, that's challenging when swaths of us don't have internet connectivity. And that's our reality. I used to live in Tunbridge, Vermont, and so much more rural community than ours. I had EC fiber there and I had great internet. I now live 15 minutes from the school, and I'm sitting in my office tonight so that I could participate in this meeting because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to hear me. So it's, that's a reality that we're really struggling with. And we've thought a lot about, and could we learn from other schools, both in our district and abroad, or outside of our district? Absolutely. I'm following up on those leads. I'd be remiss if I didn't. So happy to hear those points, and I largely agree with them, and I think so would our staff, and we can continue and will continue to do a better job going forward.
Thanks, Justin. I totally get the internet connectivity. I had to double check with my vice chair that he'd be able to take over when and probably, or if and probably when I get kicked out. So I get that. Okay, I see that Julie wanted to comment. Julie, I assume that's related to the previous comment. And then I do see that there are two attendees, Catherine first and then Janine, who wanted to speak. So I will get to you guys. I just want to give Julie a chance to jump in here.
Yeah, my response is short. Thank you, Justin, for responding so well. I just want to make sure to be clear for our teachers' sake, to make sure everyone realizes that for most kids in a lot of classes, I also have a high school student, they can be on Zoom with their teachers twice a week, with their classmates twice a week. The difference is it's not mandatory, and that is by design. Like, we did that by design because of internet connectivity issues, because of taking care of siblings, because there might be one computer in the household instead of 4, they're competing with their parents and their siblings. It is easy to set up in Darien, Connecticut, my niece has it, sort of the 8 o'clock class for 20 minutes, the 9 o'clock class for 20 minutes. Like, it's not about whether we can set it up or not. The design is yes, contact, no on mandatory. And Noah might want to speak to this, but the complaints I've gotten from students have been when there's a mandatory Zoom. Students write to me and talk about it being an equity issue. And then I have to pass that on to the departments. I'm not sure if middle school and elementary school students are doing the same, but at the high school, we're getting called on equity issues based on mandatory Zooms, which are happening in a few classes, even though that's what we've asked teachers not to do.
I think if it's okay, I'm going to go to our attendees right now. And then Noah, if you did want to answer that, I'll acknowledge you in a second. Is that okay? All right, awesome. So Catherine Steffen, and I know Josh is going to let you in for us here. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Something really struck me about what Dan and Justin just talked about, that this isn't a one-time flash in the pan, that I understand everyone is trying to kind of build the airplane as we're flying here, but I think there needs to be some long-term planning and some dedicated resources to plans of UDL. I was really surprised that the district hadn't adopted that kind of learning design, and that would help so many kids right now. I know that my children are, they're both on 504s and they're really struggling with that. I would have to say that I agree with Tim that the middle school has done a pretty good job of responding and working toward a solution for our son. The Ray School, on the other hand, I feel like they've just completely kind of thrown up their hands. And I was just reading through the survey that was posted about the 504 coordinator said that they reviewed plans with teachers to ensure that accommodations that can be in place are in place. I wasn't even contacted. And because we're kind of a visible, for 504 IEP family, several other parents contacted me too and said, I don't know what to do. How do we get services? And I reached out to Jay, and I encouraged them to reach out to Jay as well. But when the response that I got from the coordinator at the Ray School, the 504 coordinator, I want to read directly from the message she sent me, was that she has very little direct involvement in my son's 504 plan, and that beyond helping facilitate the team and meeting to initiate, revise, or update plans, that's it. That she basically put herself as the scribe of what other people are doing. And I really don't think that's the role of the 504 coordinator. I think it should be more the role that Tim just described, about jumping in and making sure that those kids are getting some sort of support during this time that's probably going to repeat. So, I mean, and that's why I think that the school board needs to look at some sort of dedicated plan for universal design, and looking at how the 504 and IEP kids are being followed during this time period.
Thanks, Catherine. And I did just want to point out, and I know, Catherine, I know you know this, thank you for sharing that. I know we should probably identify which town we're from. So if attendees can identify which town you're from. And then also just point out that this is Dresden, and I know you know that, Catherine, so Dresden and not Hanover. So some of the people who would probably respond directly to Hanover comments aren't on the call. So I did just want to point that out for everybody who's watching. But I think, you know, I will, and I'm sure Jay will reiterate this as well, but I think we're all scrambling to some extent, right? Because this is so new for the middle school, the high school, the grade schools, and the school board and the superintendent as well. So thank you for the feedback. And I think the point that we're going to have to potentially keep doing this for a longer term is definitely worth putting policies in place and, you know, looking at it more broad-based curriculum that we might be able to put in place. Catherine, did you want to respond to that? I see you put your hand back up. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, and that's why I wasn't able to participate in the last Hanover School Board meeting. But I actually think this is a district-wide issue that needs to be addressed. That it's really not something independent of each one of the schools. I think it's. I mean, I didn't see an SAU meeting on the calendar tonight.
It's actually next week.
Is it next week?
Yeah.
So, you know, they usually have been right together.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, from the Dresden's perspective, from the you know, these same kids are going to come from the race school next year, having not had that support during this time period. So it's going to fall right in the lap of I guess in 6th grade they'll still be in Hanover, and not, you know, part of the Dresden district. Yeah, I mean, it's a thorny issue.
No, definitely. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it's probably, you know, so the SAU meeting, I believe it's Monday at 6 o'clock. Is that correct, Jay or John? John's our SAU chair. He's putting his thumb up. So we have SAU meetings quarterly. So that's why it was kind of separated from this one tonight. So I apologize if that was confusing to anybody. Janine, you have been patiently raising your hand virtually for a while.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. My name is Janine King. I live in Etna. I want to thank you for the little jetpack that I'm using right now, which seems to be working well tonight, that I think Josh provided me, or the district provided. I am the math department coordinator at the high school, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what Dan was saying in terms of coordinators. I can tell you that most, I don't want to say all because I'm not sure, most math classes are having 2 optional meetings per week. Sometimes those happen between 11 and 1, sometimes they happen outside of those hours. And if they happen outside of the hours, it's usually as a result of a student polling what works best for the students. With regards to what we're going to do next year based on what we've missed this spring, we've started to talk about that, but until we know when the year is going to end teaching wise, it's hard to really have that conversation. So we are thinking about it, but we need to know what's happening and when it ends. Thank you.
And I think, yeah, I know Jay's going to speak to this. I think we're going to be discussing the end of the year in more detail at the SAU meeting, but Jay, I don't know if you wanted to add more to that right now.
I'd like to say quite a lot, actually. And first of all, I want to just echo what everybody has said about what an amazing job everyone's done in really exigent circumstances. This is not something that we've planned for. In fact, a question I've been asking lately of a variety of groups, and I think it's appropriate for the Dresden board, is think about your history that you've had with the school board, And if we had set out this year to change our grading system, for example, what would that have taken? I mean, how many meetings would we have had? How large of a committee would we have had? How many surveys would we have done? How many years would we have taken to actually make the decision and implement it? And then I'd say the same thing for major changes to curriculum. So if we were going to establish online, if we just decided that, you know what, this face-to-face stuff is expensive and unnecessary, and we're going to go remote. We're not going to teach face-to-face in a building anymore. If you could imagine the planning that would have taken to do it, and it would have been rife with debate all through, and would have taken us, I could imagine, years. So we did it in a week. It's not perfect. It's far from it. And we're seeing examples all over the country of different places that are doing it, some better, some worse. And we don't know so many variables in those comparisons. We don't know if people already had distance learning. My old district had its own distance learning option. Kids could sign up in our high school who were non-traditional or had challenges and wanted to learn, and we had to compete with cyber charter schools. So we created distance learning opportunities. We didn't have that infrastructure here. And so I want to commend everybody for doing as well as we are doing. I think, though, to many of the points that are being made, another thing that this crisis is doing is it is exacerbating problems that we've been talking about now since I got here, and maybe before, the issue of curriculum or documentation of curriculum. We want documentation of curriculum that we've just kind of adapted and whipped up in the last few weeks, when we're going to be taking a deeper look at that in the very near future. We've essentially said as a board that centralized sort of curriculum management and documentation isn't important. So again, and when Catherine and Justin mentioned UDL, when we think of strategic planning and the curriculum work that we have ahead of us, UDL should absolutely be a critical underpinning for that. And we have experts right here in the district. Patty Dodds over at RMS is an expert in UDL, and it's Universal Design for Learning. You know, I apologize for the acronyms, but Universal Design for Learning is an approach to designing instruction and curriculum that essentially bakes in differentiation for learners with different needs, and that should absolutely underlie everything that we do. But we need to make the commitment that we're going to do that work. And so we made a decision some time ago to eliminate a curriculum instruction person from the central office. So there we are. I mean, and so now when we're turning around, we're trying to document what we're going to do in the classes we do have and make them different. We don't have all that stuff in one place to clearly identify the things that need to be done or to share them publicly. So I'm off that soapbox. One of the things that Julie said, talking about mandatory Zooms, even the language that we've developed in the last month, we're all becoming pretty facile with using Zoom. And to the fact where when I call a meeting together, I usually send out the link a minute before, because I know it'll get buried in people's email if I send it earlier. But when our kids are having to decide whether to participate in Zooms or not, that are optional, or they're being faced with the inequity of a mandatory Zoom, we're in a whole new world. So the idea of a mandatory Zoom and the angst caused by having to decide whether you can participate or not, or the angst caused by the introduction of a credit plus into the options for potential grading, underscores another thing that's been a problem for us that we've talked about and done, I'd say, little about, is this notion that we have a pressure cooker, or that we disregard the students in the middle. Another thing that we really want to embrace, and we've already identified in the nascent stages of strategic planning. It's high stakes. Even now, we're seeing what that high stakes pressure does, and how it sort of seeps in when we start to make these changes. So I think there's a lot to learn from what we've done. And Dan mentioned this earlier. If we don't learn from what's happening right now and extrapolate some of the things that are occurring as a result of remote learning to what happens later, we're missing a big opportunity, and I think failing our students. but again, back to what several of you have mentioned, we don't know when this is going to get back to normal, if that's ever really possible. But more and more, we're being told that summer's not likely to be face to face. We're hearing whispers of it might be January before we can actually have a relief from social distancing. What does that mean for school? Summer camps are already making decisions to close. The state hasn't given me any guidance yet on extended school year programs for students with disabilities. And so those of you who've made the point that we need to turn from some of these in-your-face decisions that we've got to make, like grading, and we need to move very quickly into planning for next year. I think that's probably our highest priority at this point. And Kelly, is it appropriate, since we're in this discussion, shall I make my recommendation for grading now?
I think that's fine. I do see two hands, so I just want John and then Jason to know that I see them on with their hands raised.
Okay,
But I think
my filibuster, but I just wanted to help to put things in a little context.
Mhm.
And a big part of this whole thing, I think, for all of us is to think about expectations. I hesitate to use the word manage expectations because it sounds manipulative. I think we have to acknowledge what the realities are, and both acknowledge that we have room to do better, but that we've done a heck of a good job so far.
Mhm. Yeah, Jay, I don't know. Let me get to these attendees, and then if the questions are around grading, we can maybe pause them for a second and come back. So let me see what the questions are first, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to your grading recommendation. Thank you. So I believe John first. Is that right?
Hi. My question is related to grading, so Dr. Badams can go ahead and give his. So I'll wait till after he gives his formal recommendation, even though I know what it is.
Okay, and John, can you just let us know what town you're from? I know you're going to come back and chat in a second. But...
Sure. My name is John Ruth. I live in Hanover, and I have 2 students at Hanover High.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll table yours for just one second. Jason, did you have a question not grading related?
My question was also grading related.
Okay.
Or comment, rather.
Or sorry, what was that?
It was a comment about grading.
Okay, super. So it sounds like Jay, that's your cue.
Well, I made an attempt, and I'm not going to read the rather lengthy email that I sent to the board earlier. But I think a couple of our previous speakers have already sort of set the stage. I met with the teachers this past week. They invited me to join their faculty meeting in the wake of me making my recommendation, which was a modification of the recommendation that they had made for a no credit grading system. And I just, in the interest of transparency, want to just relay how all this kind of went down. First of all, there was a discussion amongst the staff about what to do with grading. And around the same time, in the beginning of the month, actually, there was a petition that students had begun to circulate. And again, not even getting into the validity of the survey, but there was a student concern around the possibility of introducing a pass-fail system, given the COVID epidemic. So we talked about that at the Norwich meeting, of all places. Actually, we had a speaker there who had initiated that survey. So for whatever reason, and I'm sure it was well intended, because we talked about trying to keep our students informed during this whole crisis. A few teachers, before we had a formal proposal for the board, essentially told students that we were moving to a no credit grading system. And you, as board members, began to get a lot of concerned parents contacting you, and so did I. And we were taken aback because this hadn't been communicated amongst us. It hadn't been something that we deliberated on in any way, and it just sort of got out. And then shortly after that, we did have a conversation with the leadership team and talked about sort of taking a deep breath and pausing for a week and considering the options, and then issuing a decision at the end of the week during vacation. And the high school essentially put out the formal recommendation, not as a done deal, but as a recommendation to the board and me, but did so in the newsletter. And I think that's, I don't fault the school for that. It's something that we should have talked about in terms of communication, when we all should have known that this would be a contentious issue. And one that the school board rightfully should have had some kind of say up front in. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I shared that with the teachers and had that same discussion. If we had taken that time and had maybe a more thorough discussion with all stakeholders involved, I think we may have headed off this drawn out process with fits and starts. But again, like many things, we're learning our way through this. The next time this happens, we'll make sure we have a communication plan around these sorts of decisions. So left there, I decided that my best bet was to do my own research, just to duplicate in some sense the work that a lot of our guidance counselors and teachers had already done in contacting schools, both colleges and universities on a spectrum, and finding out exactly what the admissions ramifications might be, depending on what we did with our grading and our calculation of GPA and our publishing of our transcripts. And I found essentially the same thing that anyone can when they Google this information. Most of the colleges that you contact are looking at students holistically. Many of them will profess that that's what they do all the time, but they're making accommodations for what they know is a very disrupted school year, or certainly semester, and they're going to be forced to look holistically, because they're going to have some schools that have chosen to retain letter grades, but they have to know and do know that the courses that are receiving an A may say honors chemistry on the transcript, but bear little resemblance to the honors chemistry in all likelihood than they would have had they been face to face and doing their full curriculum. So as far as being really concerned about how schools are going to be looking at our kids based on what's on their transcript, I think our kids will be in very good company. I think what is hard to recognize, especially if you have a child who's the first one off to college, it's got to be quite scary and intimidating right now. For those who have been through the process already, maybe less so, but everybody in the country is in the same situation. And one thing that we have to recognize is our school is widely regarded as a very high performing high school. Admissions departments know the high schools that send student candidates their way. Our guidance office spends a lot of time sending profile sheets. Every year they're updated, and those profile sheets explain the transcript. They give a lot of background about the school, and I have faith that our counselors and our teachers and our students will be able to explain what happened during this semester. So anyhow, the upshot of that conversation was that my attempt to sort of mediate this conflict and appease both sides, those who wanted letter grades and those who wanted a pure pass fail, it failed utterly, mainly because it created a whole new set of concerns and stress. Teachers began to get students who were hyper sensitive about this new plus option and wanted to know what letter grade or what numerical value would a credit plus have? And of course they couldn't answer that question. And then the thing that really got me, almost as much as counsel's opinion, was the notion that I just hadn't considered, that I thought I had good intentions in thinking that a plus could be sort of equitably distributed for those students that are high achievers and that eat books, and for those kids who had whatever challenges, two parents who were healthcare workers, or limited internet access, or need for supports that they aren't able to get in real time anymore, that used to help them get through a school day. My assumption was a teacher could give those students who are still managing to get through the program the credit plus. That's assuming a lot. And teachers and the students pointed out to me that, you know what, how do we know? How do you know what challenges someone is facing. Are they willing to share that with you? And should they be forced to say, hey, you know what? I'm out of work and I'm living on my $1,200 check that I got from President Trump. That's a big burden to put on people. And I guess to a certain degree, my own experience living, I think you're all living through this. We're all trying to figure out how to change our lives to deal with everything that we're dealing with. And I think a lot of us are finding out that we're working more than we did before. And it seems paradoxical, but I feel like I pretty much work until I can't stay awake anymore. I feel like I don't have the luxury of having an administrative assistant next door who can manage my schedule and keep my phone calls at least at a steady stream instead of immediate. And I can't keep up with my email. So if I'm feeling that, I'm imagining everybody else is too. And so between the teachers who were unanimous, and that is, I find that's striking, because our teachers are as varied as our students. There are some who I'm sure are bridling at the fact that they can't give the full load to their students during this time of remote learning, and others who are aching with the worry that they're not able to serve students who really need services through an IEP, and they're having to cobble together ways to do that, and everything in between. And so taking all that into account and realizing that my attempt to sort of bring peace to the kingdom, I really pleased nobody with the Credit Plus. I got a lot of feedback in the wake of that decision, and almost all of it was, this is no good. Please just do credit, no credit, or just say you're doing grades. So another thing I've learned. And so today I'm recommending to the board that we go with the expertise and true care for our students' well-being that was expressed in the teachers and the administration's original recommendation. I feel like my recommendation earned a no credit if it were being graded on the scale. And I would really apologize for the additional stress that recommendation caused. So I think there's still some things to be ironed out as far as what happens to the work that students did in third quarter. There are some real logistical challenges in incorporating that into the calculation of GPA, but there are ways that work can be memorialized and included in college applications, I'm sure. So I'll work with the administration to continue to figure out how we might do that. But I think we all have to take a step back from this and realize that this is an unprecedented calamity that has shut down our entire economy and disrupted people's lives in ways that generations before even haven't experienced. And I think we're all going to be able to look back and think that what grading system we chose to apply in the end is not going to be that significant of a decision given the other things we've got to decide. And so with that, that's my recommendation: credit, no credit.
Thanks, Jay. And I want to acknowledge all of the hours and hours of research and conversations and emails and phone calls and everything that Jay has put into making these decisions. So I think, while I appreciate your willingness to fall on your sword, so to speak, I also want to acknowledge the thoughtfulness that went into, both elements of this recommendation. So thank you for that time and effort, and please know that it is appreciated. If it's okay with everyone, I want to go to our two attendees who have been patiently waiting to ask their questions, and then board members, if you have questions, I'll take those after. So John.
Hi, my name is John Ruth. I live in Hanover, and I have a freshman and junior at Hanover High. I also have a student at RMS and another that graduated from Hanover High School 2 years ago. So suffice it to say, this is not my first rodeo with children going through school. The Hanover schools, we've been in the school system for 13 years. I'm reaching out in particular to tell the story of kind of my junior and kind of an advocate for kind of a different position than what Mr. Badams just proposed. The junior has had a bit of a rocky high school career academically. He suffered a significant concussion during the fall of his freshman year. His recovery took about 3 months. As a result of that injury, he took that first semester of his freshman year classes, pass-fail, found it necessary to move out of the honors algebra class and into the non-honors version, and had to withdraw from his Civitas class altogether. While these adjustments were discouraging, they were necessary for him at that point in time. Over the last 2 years, he struggled to improve his grades, and as he knows the importance of both solid test scores and progression of improving grades in the college decision process. Now, all of his hard work would be undermined by the proposed credit, no credit grading system as he heads into his final term before college admissions. During the remote learning, he has continued to apply himself academically, and he wants the letter grades that he has earned. I don't blame him, I would too. And like it or not, the college admissions departments will use students' GPA as a screening tool to filter out students in the college admissions process, just like they always have. Therefore, my student, who has been working hard and wants his letter grades, would be undermined and harmed by a credit, no credit grading structure when he goes to apply for colleges next fall. Even worse, you know, I do have concern that the proposed structure will further create confusion with college admissions officers and provide incentives for the admissions officers to deny the HHS students admission rather than just spending the time to understand kind of the grading structure. And so I have a couple of questions. You know, the first one, why doesn't Hanover and the Dresden School District handle the credit, no to credit decision on a case-by-case basis, just like it always has? Number two, and my freshman, you know, my junior, when he was a freshman, had that happen kind of because he had the extraordinary case or circumstances. Number two, if the board were to allow the option of allowing students to earn letter grades or go with the credit, no credit system, how would this harm the student that elects the credit, no credit grading? That point has just been, I've heard it a couple times and it's just confusing to me. And then in the third question is, as people have surveyed different college admissions officers, did any school explicitly state that they would not use GPA in the evaluation process or otherwise publish kind of like their admission statistics as it relates to students' GPAs? And those are my three questions kind of in comments as it relates to this proposal.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Those are some important questions. I don't know, Jay, if you want to answer.
Yeah, actually, I would defer to Julie or Justin. I can say that I more than you can possibly know, get your position and experience of your son. And while you've asserted that these schools are still going to look at GPA and grades and make their determination accordingly, it's not what they're telling us. So unless they're lying to us or just trying to make us feel better, that's not what they're telling us. And the choice, I've dealt with the choice matter going back to conversations early on when parents first learned that the school was considering some sort of a pass-fail, and the faculty felt very strongly that choice would do more to confuse the admissions departments than having a simple credit, no credit, because if they know that we're offering the option, then those students that decide to take the grade are going to be they're going to be treated differently than the student that chooses the no credit or the credit, no credit. So for every possible solution to this, there seem to be pros and cons. And the faculty felt very strongly, and again, this is why they were unanimous, even though they're not unanimous on anything else, that when it comes down to it, trying to figure out what is the most fair to the most students, they assert, and I agree, that credit no credit is the most equitable way to go. And as far as some of the other questions that Mr. Ruth had, Julie or Justin, did you have anything you'd like to add?
So I excuse me, I would just add that the credit, no credit, to be clear, won't contribute to the GPA. I think Mr. Ruth's argument was based that a student's high GPA during this time of closure wouldn't then further raise the GPA, but the credit, no credit system will not impact GPA.
So what it's going to come down to for your son, Mr. Ruth, and for other students that find themselves in situations that bear explanation, is I'm trusting in our counseling department and our staff to ensure that through the various documents that are part of the application, that those scenarios are clearly identified and explained. And so for your son's application essay, he's going to have quite a story to tell about coming back from a debilitating head injury. And there will be other students that have other stories about how they weren't able to access the internet at a time when all learning went remote. And I was told by numerous admissions officers, and I was assured by our guidance staff who've talked to even more, that they are absolutely going to be looking at those stories and those explanations to make their admissions decisions, because many other school systems are using pass fail or credit no credit or some variation. Some are offering choice, some are not offering choice. And the one thing that you'll read, whether it's MIT, University of Pennsylvania, UNH, UVM, is the phrase for situations that were beyond the applicant's control. And I heard that over and over in my conversations with directors of admissions and deans of undergraduate admissions, that they're not going to penalize students for things that were outside their control. Mm-hmm. But we're going to have to work together to make sure that we fight for our students and make sure that they're portrayed in those admissions offices in the best light.
And Jay, just to clarify, and I know I have two panelists, and still Jason has been patiently waiting, but we are still considering Q3 grades and a way to somehow factor that into GPA, or is that now, are you recommending that go off the table at this point?
Well, I don't know, not necessarily go off the table, but those grades, number one, we have a big problem with the Q3 grades in that the quarter was truncated. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of there were no final exams, for example, and mm-hmm. there was work that was not completed that in some cases remains incomplete. And Julie, I don't know if you want to address this. You and I went back and forth on this earlier. We are trying to figure out ways that we can incorporate that work or portray that work. And maybe there's a chance for some sort of choice there that wouldn't create this inequity. But I'm going to step away from those sorts of decisions at this point, having learned my lesson, and defer to those who know more about how that stuff's calculated. But Julie or Justin, do you want to address the third quarter grade question?
Well, I just wanted to first say, Andrea Johnstone, our head of counseling, is in the a member of the attendees if we want to ask her college related questions. And then, what we went back and forth about, Jay, was just in staff meeting when we talked about the Q3 piece, it's trickier than it seems because it was a shorter quarter. Some students could have taken retakes to tests and then were put off on the retakes for a little while. And we're trying to figure all of this out and said to try the, distance learning. And so the grades aren't necessarily completely accurate. And so if we went back to that, we would want to allow some of those students to take retakes that they might not have taken, or allow them to do an assessment that they were supposed to take, but then we had to change the assessment based on the change in the way we were teaching. So it's just a little more complicated than it might seem, as most things are.
My only question, and Andrea, definitely if you want to jump in, I see you've been moved over to panelists, so love the picture, by the way. I think one of the things that we were wondering if it might be possible, and this goes to John's point, was basically to make things as potentially advantageous for students during this moment as possible. Whatever that might mean for individual students. For some students, that might at this point mean pass fail, that is the best scenario for them for a variety of reasons. Sorry, credit, no credit. And that for other students, grading, and it sounds like this is the case for Mr. Ruth's son, grading might be a more advantageous situation for that individual student. So a way to essentially hold harmless, I've heard that term sort of used, but hold harmless for all students, whatever that might mean. But I don't know the ins and outs of that, if that's a possibility. So I don't know who wants to speak, if anyone, or should I invite Jason to maybe share his question at this point? Would that be good?
Looks like
Is
Andrea
Andrea-
unmuted. You unmuted, Andrea. Does that mean you want to say something?
Well, I don't know. I missed a little bit. Sorry, Baby Yoda there. I missed a little bit of the questions. I was rejoining as a panelist, or the comment, Kelly, that you were making. But I guess just quickly, college admissions will be looking at those first 5 semesters if we're looking at a junior. So those first 5 semesters of high school still have a GPA and have a trend. And the trend that was just described is one of those positive trends. Then we have COVID time. We do have Q3 grades. We can see those. Counselors can see that. Our job is to translate the transcript in our letter and to bring light to that and to share a story of that student individually. And we have COVID time. And kids are going to have stories how they get through this, how what we might observe, and what their parents are going to share with us. So that's all part of our letters as well. So there's a letter that's going to come and follow each student to college. There's their grades before COVID. Hopefully this is a short period of time, right? Hopefully it's this semester that we're looking at differently, which in an overall GPA has very little impact on that cumulative piece. I think the board maybe has a document that sort of shows that it's a small number of credits that are going into the math. And I won't talk math because that was a long time ago for me. But that impact is minimal. The trend is much more important when you look at 9th grade, 10th grade, and junior fall, excuse me. And they are holistic, and we have to believe that colleges are going to continue to be holistic. When we talk about tier 1 schools, which is where we spend a lot of time in our district talking about, that's a completely different ballgame. And that, with or without COVID, quite frankly, you have to be at the top of your game for all 4 years in the toughest classes, and have connections, and have lots of other things that we can't even determine because the institutions themselves are setting their own parameters of what they need and want in a student. So outside of tier 1, colleges are going to be very open still, and they are holistic, and they always have been. And it's a really positive and beautiful time and fun time for families. It's when we look at those most competitive colleges that we get the most stress. And I personally don't think a credit plus is going to impact that one way or another, in my opinion.
I think, yeah. Thanks, Andrea. I think, and I'm going to let John just jump in for a second. I am conscious of time, and so I'm going to start to try to kind of not to cut things short, but try to move us forward. But John, I did want to give you a chance just to, I guess, come back in for a second.
Yeah, thank you for additional time. My point is exactly what I believe as Andrea just mentioned. The trend is very important, and for not only my student that had but any student that trend is improving and wants to be able to tell that story, to have that option taken away from him and truncating it his junior year. So most students would be at 5 semesters. He's going to be at 4. He's not going to have his strongest semester grades taken into account. And that is exactly my point, is that he should be allowed, as well as anybody that is able to do and still wants to do the work to earn the letter grades, should be given that option at a minimum. The other alternative is that Hanover High could make the credit, no credit decision on a case-by-case basis, just like it did for my son when he was a freshman. But I realize that's, not, it kind of sounds like that's not that's actually the opposite of where Hanover's looking at. So, but, at a minimum, students should be allowed the option to earn their letter grades. If otherwise you're talking, I can give you an exact case of how it's going to harm my student or any student that has an upwardly trending GPA and coursework, and how they're applying it themselves and how they continue to apply themselves during I like the phrase COVID time. And it should be their decision, and it's, I think the case where the student that selects credit, no credit, for the admissions counselor that is aware that pass or that letter grades were an option could potentially be harmed. I think that's a pretty weak argument relative to the very real case where you're not going to be able to, the students are not going to be able to fully demonstrate the upward trajectory. For the students that have a constant GPA, it doesn't matter. It's really for the students that where this, or even for that matter, for the students that are earlier in their career or seniors, the last term or this term is not going to matter, but it's going to matter a lot for the juniors, because colleges over and over again say that they look at the last year as a juniors. Those are the most important grades. And if you have 1/6 of the grades not counted because, as far as the GPA, that's going to hurt, for the students, like I said, where their grades have been improving, and they should be allowed the option to earn the letter grades.
Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate that. We will certainly keep that in consideration. Jason, I know you've been patiently waiting. Would you like to come in here?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Hirschhorn. I teach math and computer science at the high school. And I just wanted to thank you all for having tonight's discussion and allowing us to be a part of it. Briefly, I just wanted to mention a brief anecdote from earlier today. I teach a lot of juniors, particularly in my computer science classes. And I had one who is on a similar upward trajectory. And he's very concerned about his Q3 performance, which he thinks was his best performance yet, and how that may or may not be counted. He was concerned about not having the option to get credit plus or a letter grade to show how hard he's been working. And I think through our conversation together today, we kind of came to the feeling that the work he's doing this semester and the outstanding work he's doing this semester, sort of the best way for that to be conveyed to colleges is probably not through the Q3 grades or a credit plus grade, is probably through some sort of narrative. And sort of my commitment to him was I'm going to be writing one of his recommendation letters. And I've pledged to him that I will make sure that I highlight that and I emphasize that and how hard he's been working and how much progress he's made, because I've actually had him this whole year. And so to Andrea's point and Dr. Badams's point, like as one of the teachers from the high school, that's sort of one of the ways that I'm planning on fighting for our students to ensure that what's happening now is captured and in a way that I think will actually be even more impactful than letter grades or credit pluses. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jason. We appreciate that. And I see one last attendee comment, Sage McKinley-Smith.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure how my internet is. Yeah, so I'm Sage McKinley-Smith. I'm actually a junior at Hanover. And I kind of had a bunch of thoughts on this. I'm also on council, so I was also present for that discussion. But something I wanted to bring up is I'm kind of off put a little bit by how much we've focused on grades and like the college part of things, because I think that what we're dealing with right now is so much bigger than anything that has to do with college or has to do with grades in general. And I think that stuff is really important. But I think at this point, like student mental health should be our priority. And I think the proposal that Dr. Badams has put forward is the most advantageous proposal for the mental health of the most number of students. And I think that's what we're really trying to go for here. And I think that it certainly will disadvantage some students. And I think that that's definitely a concern. But I think that either any proposal is going to disadvantage a number of students. And I think what we have to consider is what is the most advantageous proposal for everyone. And I think that this proposal gives us the opportunity as a school district to I think we always say that we value learning over grades and we value learning over anything to do with college, but I think we don't always show that. And I think this is an opportunity as a school district to really prove to students that we value their mental health and their learning above anything else. And then also something I wanted to bring up about the optional credit, no credit, something that's actually come up a bunch of times in discussions with teachers that I've had, with council, stuff like that, is that I know people make the argument that it allows students to choose whether or not they want to do a credit, no credit system. But as Mr. Will mentioned in the comments, colleges will notice whether you choose a credit, no credit system or a or to do grades. And as much as I hate to bring it back to colleges, I think that is what is swaying the most people in this situation, at least as it pertains to juniors. And I think that in that way, it actually, as much as we say it allows people to choose, it actually makes the decision for people and gives some people an advantage over others based on situations they can't control. So I feel like if someone were in a situation where they really could not choose to be graded because it was just a situation that, whether for family or health or something like that, I don't think that they should have to be disadvantaged in the college process because their family situation or their health or something like that was the difference there. And in that way, it's not really a choice, and it's not a choice that is based on anything within the student's control, but from an outside perspective, it may look like it was a choice. And so that's why I'm really strongly, I would much rather be all grades or all no credit than an optional, because I think that creates the exact same issue. And then I think one more thing, I've actually been to a number of virtual college visits, whatever, over the past couple of weeks that I've been at home. And I would reiterate that a lot of college admissions officers that I've talked to from a student perspective have said that, quite honestly, like they can look at grades that are A, B, C, whatever from a school, and they can look at grades that are credit, no credit, and they really can't make a differentiation because they have no idea. I mean, it's already difficult enough for them to understand what the grading system at individual schools might be, but I think this situation, schools are handling it so differently, even more differently than they normally handle grading. And so it's creating, they're essentially not able to really look at the difference between an A and a B or a B and a C. Like those differences are not significant to them, for at least from the conversations that I've had. And in terms of like, if a student gets straight A's this quarter, that's awesome. And that shows that they really worked hard, but it also, colleges aren't going to look at it the same way as if they looked at it from a different quarter, from third quarter, something like that. So I think that's something to consider, is that just because we switch to a grading system doesn't suddenly mean that getting straight A's is going to necessarily look amazing, because colleges are going to look at that and understand that maybe half the students that are applying have had similar, have the no credit system. So sorry, that was kind of a lot, but those are kind of some points that I wanted to bring up from the student perspective.
Thank you, Sage. We very much appreciate all of our students who want to chime in. So it is closing at 9 o'clock, and we do have a long agenda. I've asked Ellie and Casey if they have something new to add, because I'm going to ask at this point that our comments have something new that we haven't heard yet. So I haven't seen a response from them. Their hands are still up. So let's quickly do Ellie and Casey, and then I think I'm going to cut us off at that point, knowing that we will come back to vote on this. As you can tell, it's a very, people have a lot to say, to contribute. And so that's why the board is actually going to vote to approve Jay's recommendation. or not later in the meeting. So Ellie, did you have something new to contribute?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm also a junior and I'm also on council, but speaking from my own personal circumstances, I would just like to add another anecdote about the third quarter grading. I agree wholeheartedly with the previous speaker in that unifying what everyone shows for third quarter is super important in terms of the college admissions process and keeping everything fair. But I just wanted to say I was personally very worried about losing some of my third quarter grades because I worked super hard on them, particularly my math grade. I think I showed a lot of growth in it. However, I think that it's really important to consider that although through my counting, we had just about 29 days in our third quarter, which is not numerically a quarter of the year's work. And so many things went unfinished during this time that I don't think it's right to report kind of an unfinished grade as full value of a regular quarter. And I talked to my counselor specifically about the grades that I was a little bit worried about losing. And she made it very clear that there were ways that that can be included kind of when I present my story to college admissions officers next year. And Dr. Badams actually noted in his email that he sent out a couple weeks ago initially, kind of putting out his recommendation to the school or Hanover High School. And he just noted that these grades can be noted through counselor addenda to application materials, transcript annotations, and recommendation letter elucidations. And I think that that's very important to consider and that maybe is our best option to keeping things fair going forward rather than making it a choice or reporting third quarter grades for all students.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Casey, anything new to add to that?
I just have a quick comment. I'm also a junior and I'm also a council representative. And I have heard concerns from some teachers and other students about the idea that students maybe like wouldn't try as hard or might not put in as much effort with a pass-fail system or a no credit credit system. And I think that while there are some valid concerns with some students going in that direction, I still think a large amount of students will be like still dedicated to their studies and want to learn because they know that a lot of classes are cumulative and you need to know the information in order to go to the next class the next year. And so I think from the students I have talked to, I don't think it would change on like the larger scale, the amount of effort that's being put into the classes. And just as Sage was saying, in terms of mental health, I just think this is such an unprecedented time. And I think we really need to be focusing on helping students in terms of helping with mental health, helping the community and keep students connected. That I think shifting to the system will focus more on giving students feedback and trying to help them learn rather than trying to figure out how to give students grades and give assignments and test students on certain materials. I think it would just shift to a much better system in terms of helping students and staying positive throughout this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. And I will reiterate what Martha just said in the chat. She just said thank you to all of our students. It's not easy to speak in this forum for any of us, so very much appreciate you guys stepping up. And as always, our students speak so eloquently. It's always absolutely astounding to me how wonderful you all are. So I think if I don't see any more board, Ben, yes?
Hi. First, I'm not going to speak as well as the students because I didn't go to Hanover High, but I did actually serve on a college admissions committee before as a voting member, both at the undergrad and graduate level at a tier 1 school. And reading the comments from the attendees, certainly there is a large attention focused on GPA. You kind of have to in terms of whittling it down and, getting the shoe-ins, getting rid of the obvious knots, and it's the people in the middle that you focus on. And this story of what we're all going through right now is one that many people are going to have to deal with. And I fully agree with the students actually saying that if you put the choice of letting people do their grades or not, that prompts more questions than it helps resolve issues. And so I'm planning currently on voting for maintaining credit, no credit, but also that the schools are not going to be paying attention to this current grading cycle for third quarter / end of the year. And they're going to be looking at how students tell their stories. And they're certainly going to look at the GPA for, sophomore year and freshman year and first half of junior year, but I don't think they're too concerned about what the students are doing right this second. So that's all.
Thanks, Ben. Okay. So we will come back to this for a vote in the business requiring action. We are going to speed on ahead to the administrative position searches update. And I'm hoping, so at this point, most of these updates, I think will be pretty quick updates since a lot of it is just kind of where we're at. There's not a lot of discussion really required. It's more of an update. So Jay, where's Jay? There's Jay up in the corner now. You moved around. Do you need me to unmute you, Jay?
Nope, sorry, I was on another screen trying to put the new resolution or put the word for a potential resolution in there. As far as the administrative searches, I will, is Julie still with us? Yes, Julie's still here. I'll ask her to talk about the associate principal search, but I'll talk first about the principal search at Ann Arbor High. And Justin started to talk about this in your presence. It seems a little awkward, but we wish Justin well in his new adventure in Middlebury come July. But we're making plans to find a successor. So I have invited our staff participants in the search process. And so far I have a lot of folks who are willing to do it. We currently have 15 applicants for the position. And our hope is to convene a team the week of May 11th and to do our screening interviews, our first round of screening interviews the week of May 18th. That may be ambitious, but we're going to shoot for that. We're hoping to have 2 board representatives, one from Hanover and one from Norwich. 5 faculty representatives, including one representative from HEA at large, and then others representing various types of teachers, so that we want to make sure that we have someone from special education. We want good representation of the faculty. We're also looking for representatives from support staff, and I anticipate a committee of 16 members. We'll have 2 administrators, myself and a principal from one of the other schools. Essentially, we're modeling this particular process on the same one that we used at RMS and at Marion Cross last year. So we'll be seeking input from a wide variety of stakeholders through surveys and through the second round interviews when we bring folks to campus. Virtually, I guess this time. It's going to be really tricky to do that second round, but I hope to have groups of stakeholders be able to meet with the finalists, and we'll do that in whatever way it makes the most sense. And that's something that's part of the work that the committee will do in its first get together, is to sort of shape the process. So that's where we are with the principal search. Julie, do you want to talk about where we are with the associate principal? Before you do, though, I just want to reassure everybody. I know there was some concern about timing. So our hope in that the associate principal search is to be far enough along in the principal search that when we get to finalists in the associate principal selection process, that we would be able to have the potential successful candidate participate. That may or may not be possible. So Julie, where are we?
So in terms of the assistant principal search, we have a committee with 9 staff members, 2 students, and a community member. We're starting our interviews actually tomorrow. We're interviewing Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. And then we're going to see where those interviews take us in terms of whether we want to do a second round, whether we, how we want to deal with that. And then we had hoped for an overlap, but above all else, we don't want to jeopardize the quality of candidates we have and have any of them leave based on another search not matching with this search. So as a committee, we're very clear that we don't want to compromise that. So if it doesn't match, it doesn't match. And if it matches, we would love it. So, we had that conversation again as a group. And the ideal would be to have a principal sit on the committee for the second round. But if it means we lose somebody, then we are pretty confident in the people we have in the committee. And there are 12 of us, that we can make a really great decision for the high school minus a principal, if that's what we have to do.
Sure, and that'll depend largely on the applicant pool. And you reminded me, I also am inviting 2 students and 2 parents to sit on the team as well.
Sorry.
Kelly, any questions about?
Yeah, so Noah had wanted to ask a question about the principal search committee, I believe.
Dr. Badams answered it. I just wanted to remind him that I would like to see 2 students on that search committee. That also falls under the council handbook guidelines for hiring a principal. So thank you, Dr. Adams.
And Noah, I'll go you one better. I'd like to have a student interview panel when we get to the finalists. I had to sit through one in an interview I did up in Essex Westford. It was the most intimidating interview that I had, but it was also great in the end. And I think it was really helpful for the folks that there were only a few other adults that sat in on that interview, and they got to see how I interacted with students. So I think that's really valuable.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. Thank you.
And I see Linda had a question as well, and Andante over in the attendees. It may have been the same question.
Oh, hi, I'm Linda Dante from Norwich, Vermont, and I am advisor to council. So we've been having a lot of conversations about transparency and staying connected when it comes to communication. So with that in mind, just today we were talking about a process that students, I don't know what the process is for students getting on committees. I know there was a process for staff. So it's great to hear that there's 2 students on the associate principals search committee. I'm just wondering about the principal search committee, how the students are selected, and if it's a selection process, what that is, so students know. And if there's a process where they apply, what is that, so they know. Thank you.
Sure. And Kelly?
Yep. Yeah, sorry, Jake, please.
So Linda, I've begun just a general casting call with the staff first, but would be open to suggestion. I'd love, again, like I said, in the second round, I anticipate an interview team comprised of students, and would love it if council was willing to sort of spearhead that. But as far as the 2 representatives, I'm not familiar with how that's been done in the past here. I know in my interview for superintendent, there was a student rep on the board's superintendent interview team. And again, I'm not sure how that person was selected, but I'm open to suggestion on that. And I'd like to have those people selected by Friday.
Okay. Maybe we could circle back with Julie might be a logical person to chat with on the best process for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you what we did and what we do for other committees, but I don't know if it's the best process.
We can talk about it tomorrow.
But it's a good one, and it seems to work, and the students are often the most valuable members of our committee.
Right.
And they think of things differently, and they have amazing questions. And as you've heard from the students that we even have showing up today, they're really valuable members. And I really can't imagine being in a school that didn't include students on interview committees.
Right.
Linda, I see Linda put her hand back up. I'm not sure if she wanted to suggest a process. Or...
I'm trying to remember, because I've been on committees, you know, for principals, for superintendents, and we've always had really 2 students who their input is so highly valued by all the members. And I'm trying to remember how we did it. So I was actually going to talk with Julie about this, because I know council is involved from time to time in helping select students for various, you know, committees and as student reps. But I think in fairness, I actually expressed to the students today and a couple of council committees I was in that I think we're just thrilled to have student voice in this process. And we also, all the students on council talk about wanting to have it represent the student body. And so I don't think it's a secret. A lot of times people will say council members sometimes aren't as representative of the whole student body. So whatever process we can use that sort of, gets that mix, and then a process that supports the student reps on having access to the student body. And that's where council could certainly play a major role in helping, that channel of communication between the student reps and the larger student body.
So just so you know, and Linda, you've been on these, but for the committee that, we've done a number of Zoom interviews in the last few weeks. For the one we did for 504, we tried to make sure a 504 student was on that. For the, so there's just like, and we all talk about that and then try to decide who might be the best. And in the case of the Zoom culture, we also have to make sure that person represents well on Zoom or is willing to get onto Zoom. And so, for the assistant principal, it was batting around a number of names and then finally narrowing it down to 2. But we think of who spends a lot of time in the office working with student activities and who might spend a lot of time in the office for other reasons, and maybe having representatives from both those areas. And so both students represent different sides of that coin in terms of office interaction. But there's no sort of, with the staff, I think we always seem to do a casting call, like you're saying, in some of these positions, especially with assistant principal and principal. When it's departments, it's often the whole department, and the department talks about students that they think would represent different sides of a coin, in terms of having 2 students represent different things. So, but it's never done in sort of the casting call way, Linda. So I get what you're saying in terms of, in some ways, a student wouldn't know how to get on one of these committees necessarily, right? But the students who are on them love being on them, and they're not always your usual suspects. But we may want to think about some sort of casting call in the future too, so that students who really want it, who are interested and we don't know they're interested, can express their interest.
And I did just want to add a question from Janine that came through in the Q&A. Will Jay select the staff members, or will the staff vote on who they want to represent them? Jay, I don't know if you can answer that quickly.
I'm sorry, Kelly, could you say it again?
Will you be selecting the staff members, or will the staff vote on who they want to represent them?
I'll be selecting. I did promise the HEA that I would work with them as well, to make sure we have representation, and I'll be working with the administration too to get feedback on who I should select. But I did reserve the option to select the participants in the previous 2 searches.
Great, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised at this point, so I'm going to move us on to the curriculum audit update, which I think will also be at this point a pretty quick update. Dr. Badams.
I'm so sorry. I'm on
That's okay.
Word docs trying to type. Yeah.
All of yours have been right in a row, which is hard.
I'm trying to do 2 things at once on 2
It's
different
Jamie's
screens.
turn soon, so.
Yeah. Okay, here I am. Okay, I'm so sorry. Please repeat.
So we're at the curriculum audit update.
It's an easy update. We originally had planned to have the team from Penn present to our K-12 curriculum folks, as well as the board, in the end of April. And with everything that's happened, we've had to push that out. And I'll be presenting to our administrative team Friday the results of the curriculum audit. And then we're hoping to be able to plan meetings on May 20th for the K-12 team, and for whichever committee or larger group of the board is available on the 20th. Tentatively, they're looking at a 1 o'clock and a 3 o'clock presentation, so it might be difficult. But we can certainly work with the board to find a more suitable time if there is one.
Great, thank you. And I apologize, you may have just said this, but are those presentations open to the public, or will they be just for the board at this point?
At this point, they were just informative for the board.
Okay.
So I'll be presenting. We could have them come back again for a public forum, but I think I'll be fine presenting their findings. They've generated a PowerPoint and have all the data tables and everything that I can share easily.
Okay, super. Questions? I see one question from the public. When will the audit results be made public?
after I've had a chance to present them to the administration and the board. We'll then make them public.
Great.
And I would also add that this will be one data set that we'll be using as we try to restart our strategic planning process. This is one of the things we were waiting for in order to jump into the educational part of that plan.
Great.
So it'll be very public.
Super. Okay, not seeing any other questions on the curriculum audit update, which we will come back to, I think, in more detail in May. So moving on to the district financials. Jay, you get to take a little bit of a breather.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to push you down so I can look at all of the attachments here. We're handling this a little bit different than we would a quarterly report, because as we all know, the month of March was anything but normal. That being said, I'm sharing information that I also shared with the budget committees meeting chairs, which we had back on April 9th, that has a very early projection of year end, so we could see, what we were looking at. That absolutely has changed since April 9th, when we found out on April, I think it was, days run together here, 14th or thereabouts, that we would not be coming back to school physically. We would still be embarking on, remote learning. So many purchase orders that had been put on the system that encumbered funds have been released. And quite frankly, I'm sure we're still only a week and a half into the new horizon for the next 8 weeks. So there are still purchase orders going back and forth. So that being said, if everybody would take a look at, I do want to make one comment too. Let's see, if we could look at the Dresden projection at 4920, which is the second document posted in. I've been asked to just quickly, and I will try to be brief. It is a lot of information for you. Some folks have seen this before at the Hanover board meeting. We kind of had the same type of discussion. This is a quick projected unaudited end of fiscal year report. And what it tries to do is to show you at April 9th, the first column is your budget column. The second column is where we actually were at April 9th, the year to date. The third column, the projection of additional receipts and or encumbrances, depending on whether you're in the revenue section or the expenditure section, which is the bottom part. It's my projection of where I think we'll end up. As you can see, when you're looking at the Dresden revenues, we've had variances that we're projecting in the tuition lines, a shortage there of 175,000. We knew that early in the year because, we had 8 students, I think it was 8, might have been 9, that'd be 180,000 thereabouts. Students that either moved away, moved into district, their families did, so the tuition revenue went away, or made choices that didn't include us, right? So they made alternative choices. We also had some changes in other local revenues, and we knew some of those early on. So then you can see as we go down to the expenditure sections, when you do a quick projection, the easiest way to do it is by your spending object lines, because it really will separate some of your discretionary, quote unquote, expenditures from ones that aren't. So your object codes 100, 1XX, 2XX, 200s, salaries and benefits are not discretionary. Most of those are backed up by contracts. So we really can take a look at those, and they're encumbered for the entire fiscal year, and say, okay, where are we going to end up there? There's not a lot of changes that are going to happen in that regard. The rest of the lines, which you can see the descriptions for them in those object codes. You know, some of those expenditures are a bit discretionary, meaning that they can and or will change depending on the circumstances surrounding how we deliver the educational programming. So that being said, at April 9th, those were the encumbrances and projections based on what we knew at that point in time. Again, they have changed. There has been quite a few encumbrances released. I will be updating all of those for our May board meetings because we'll have a very good picture of where we're going to end up. They were, in fact, this week, I'm sure the school board knows, as the encumbrance reports or the accounts payable reports just went out. We just did a large round of reimbursements coming on off of the canceled March intensive trips. So we're still working on all of our funds and getting them up to where they need to be, you know, tying them all out. So that being said, when you take the projected variances from your revenues and then you talk about potential budget balances from your expenditures, because we have pulled back on many things. When you get towards the end of the year, the best practice in the state of New Hampshire and the thing that auditors look for is that you don't spend the funds just because they're still remaining. Funds spent within the fiscal year have to be used for the purpose of something within that fiscal year. That being said, many projects like buildings and grounds and site improvements usually they can start within this fiscal year and then be completed within the month of July or August. So at the end of the day, when we look at projected fund balance, other people call it surplus. It's actually fund balance. We're looking at a potential revenue shortfall of $242,000 with a projected expenditure budget balance that will go up, I can tell you right now, from that figure based on what I know of changes that have occurred. But at the end of the day, that would have offered a fund balance of $266,323. We also, Dresden had voted on allowing for retainage of surplus funding or fund balance for emergency purposes. So every year we look at that, the board takes a look at what the surplus monies are remaining, and then they vote on whether to retain the 2.5% that's allowed by New Hampshire statute for the New Hampshire portion of the Dresden funding. This past year from 18-19, we retained $345,883. We have to vote that every single year. It does not roll over automatically. So when you add that to what the projection was on April 9th, it means we would have had an amount available at 6/30/20 of $612,206. That number is important for a couple of reasons. When we build our 2021 budgets, we have to, when we go out with the warrant articles to the voters, we have to try to project what a tax rate might look like on both sides of the river. And the Dresden assessment is what drives the tax rates, right? So if we say we have to, we're going to have surplus or fund balance that's available to offset taxes of $200,000, that means we don't have to raise that amount in assessed revenues. So if we give back, if you will, to the taxpayers against assessment of $612,000, thereabouts, right, depending on what we might vote for retainage, then that means the assessments that we've projected, okay, when we built the 2021 budgets would go down on both towns' taxes, right? Because you set the assessments and then based on the values in each of the towns, then they therefore set tax rate. Vermont is a little bit more, there's a lot more to setting the tax rate in Vermont, but the assessed values still play into that. So it's an important figure when we look at spending, wrapping up spending for the 1920 year. As we look at the economy around us and the fact that the state of Vermont is looking at a $90 million potential revenue shortfall for their education fund, and the state of New Hampshire, where we raise money locally within each of our towns, are in discussions, email discussions with the treasurer of the town of Hanover. They know early on, that was about, I think, April 16th, I reached out. They already know they'll have a $750,000 shortfall for revenue that helps many different kinds of funding, right? In New Hampshire, the funding's done a little differently, and the towns do sit on retainage, similar to what we had voted to sit on. So they'll have retainage that will carry them through a certain period of time. I'm going through all of this, and some of it's review for some of you folks, because we do have new board members, sitting on our boards. I also had many emails today about some potential questions that I might want to touch upon. And so I'm just looking at the emails that I've printed out here. Okay, so we talked about tax bills. We talked about the carryover. When we projected the Dresden 2021 budget, we projected a carryover or fund balance, if you will, of 200,000, and we were being very cautious because we knew we had some revenue issues. This COVID-19 has been a terrible plight for the world. Out of it, however, there will be savings in the budgeted expenditures, and there's just simply no way around that. We're not spending as we would have. All travel has been canceled, so it's changed a lot of things. So that is that question. The other one's on the turf field. That's coming up shortly. There's also a big talk about the CARES Act and the money's coming back to school districts, and it's going to be 30 million or 40 million depending on what state you're in. All of those refunded monies, I guess you can call them refunds or supplemental monies, if you will, coming from the states to the school districts for expenditures that we may not have incurred otherwise, other than this pandemic. That's all based on Title I funding. And fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, we are districts that are very well funded. And so our portion of Title I funding in Hanover, Dresden, and Norwich is very, very, very small. And we're set to potentially get 90%, 85%, depending on what state you're talking about, of what our regular Title I funding is. And I had sent that email. I think I posted those out here, and I did it after you folks probably pulled these up, but they are posted if you go back out a little bit later. But I can tell you, the Dresden received about $43,422 out of 41 million in New Hampshire, and Hanover received $7,146 out of 41 million in New Hampshire, and Norwich receives $23,988 out of, I believe, $32 million in Vermont. So as most of you can do the math, that's less than 0.1%, okay, of the funding. So we're not going to get a lot from the CARES Act, but anything is better than nothing, correct? So that speaks to the title funding that from the CARES Act, or the Emergency School Funding Relief Act. There's a bunch of acts right now. I've also attached information about some of the acts, about the grant funds report at 4.9. There was also a thought about, there's a legal question that was posed. if something happens with one of our states, if New Hampshire or Vermont can't pay their share of the assessment, what then happens? Does the shortfall get split between each town by the percent of the budget allocation that year, or is it only handled on one side, not the other? So that's a little complicated. Vermont amount is set, the Vermont assessment amount is set to the state of Vermont in May. The New Hampshire assessment amount is set to the town of Hanover taxpayers in October. So the New Hampshire side wouldn't experience a shortfall because we'd know if we had one at that point in time. And so it just means their assessment would be higher if we knew there was an issue coming out with revenues. And so the tax rates would be higher. On the Vermont side, if the Vermont side is adjusted and Vermont, Norwich here, was not able to keep Dresden's assessment whole, then the shortage would therefore come out of surplus. And if there was not enough surplus to accommodate it, and I don't think this has ever happened, so I'm sure it would be a legal question to our folks who know all things Dresden. But as I think about it, if there was a shortfall and we didn't have enough surplus to accommodate all of our debt, then we would have a deficit appropriation for the next year out, and it would be apportioned accordingly between both states. That would be my quick answer on that email that I received. Okay, let's see. I talked about the town of Hanover. So for the 2021 year, because it says we're talking about this as well.
Yeah, Jamie, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I think just to sort of frame the conversation for next year. So to summarize, I think our position for this year is very good, partly because we had already pulled in all the revenues that we had anticipated, and partly because we had some savings due to things that didn't end up happening because of the closures. And so we are at this point looking at, well, we know we're going to have some shortfalls in revenue for next year. And so what can we do and what can't we do to help mitigate those anticipated shortages?
Correct.
So, sorry, just wanted to give that framing.
Right, and you're correct. And that's why we had put this discussion, sorry, long day, on every single one of our district board meetings. We did have this conversation at Hanover, and we will also have it again, I'm sure, at Norwich. So in New Hampshire, funding for school districts, as I mentioned, is treated a little differently than it is in Vermont. So in New Hampshire, when you vote a budget, that's the budget that's set with the New Hampshire DRA. And that's the dollar amount that we use in order to set assessments, which also drives taxes. Right now, when we talk about revenues for next year, we're obviously not going to make, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I would be amazed if we made the targets that we set for revenues for interest earnings, because, you know, the economy is not doing well. I have some fears about tuition income. I don't know how the state of Vermont will treat choice. The state of Vermont's been having many discussions, and I think Neil would probably be easier, would have more information, you know, to discuss what's going on in the legislature regarding that. And I don't even know that they've gotten that far. We could have rental revenue that will be affected. We would have athletic user fees that possibly could be affected if the athletics are canceled for the fall. Although if the athletics are canceled for the fall, then I would assume that we wouldn't be paying out the expenditures that go along with it. So that might be a wash. Let's see, I have not been told by anyone that any of the New Hampshire building aid or vocational reimbursements or catastrophic reimbursements will be affected. So I think all of the monies that we would normally have coming in revenue from the state of New Hampshire are solid. What else can I answer for you or tell you? We can pull back on expenditures because we know that both Vermont and the town of Hanover are going to have, you know, financial constraints. We thought it prudent in the conversations with the budget committees and the finance folks from the town of Hanover Finance Committee that we look at and do a projection for next year for the first 6 months on what the actual expenditures are that we cannot pull back or hold back on, so that we can tell our towns what our cash flow needs would be, which would potentially help them from having to borrow funds in order to meet our fiscal needs.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think that the main purpose of tonight's update, just for those watching from home, but also for board members who may not, I think everyone's heard this at Hanover and Norwich already on the board, but the main purpose is just to kind of make people aware that we do have some anticipated revenue shortages coming up for next year, and that we are doing what we're able to do to mitigate that, but knowing that our budgets were already voted for next year, which means that that towns are responsible for raising the amount that was approved by the voters. And so we will do what we can to control expenses where we can, and to mitigate the impact on our towns, but that to some extent, there's only so much we can do for next year. And the other thing that we want to tell people know is that a lot of these decisions will be made by the, with not decisions, pardon me, the workshopping of where we could maybe consider putting a hold on spending or putting a freeze on hiring if that needed to happen. Some of that workshopping is going to be done in the budget committees, which are also open to the public, and that will be coming up very shortly. And then we will make decisions as a board after those budget committees have deliberated in conversation with building administration and SAU administration. So questions at this point, or Kim, if you wanted to add something, I see you unmuted. Kim is our, she's on pretty much every budget committee and also our finance liaison for Hanover, so.
Thanks. So I did want to kind of clarify this proposal, which is, I think, the first document in board docs, which is an excerpt from my email after our budget committee meeting. And I really hope that this is not to be alarming to our whole community. I think this is just really trying to prepare for the unfortunate situation if we find ourselves in a shortfall or even a cash flow timing shortfall that Jamie was mentioning. I would hope that we work in a public forum such as a budget committee, you know, a trust administration to manage really the day-to-day budget, but to kind of put in a public forum, what are we really, you know, what are we doing to kind of manage that that fund balance to make sure that, because actually, as Jamie described, the best way that we can kind of reduce taxpayer worry and bills come later this year or the next bill is actually savings in 1920. And we, at least in the state of New Hampshire, really can't touch that 2021 ask. So to try to, you know, to really to show that we're in this together and to figure out proactively and really looking for administration and staff to propose this. I'm not anticipating as a board member, you know, getting a pencil out and figuring out what is discretionary and what could be the first thing, you know, to really conserve on. And so I just think that's basically the genesis of this proposal is let's try to get this list together, figure out what size of the hole are we talking about. I think Jamie has done some great work, even since our last budget committee meeting, understanding what the difference is between our states and the towns, to figure out what the size of the potential hole that we would maybe need to fill, and then figure out what a list of those options would be so that administration, staff, board community can all consider that those are, you know, reasonable discretionary expenses that that we would need to, you know, reconsider. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So, oh, I see one other comment. I apologize. Oh, that was Kim. Okay, great. All right, if there are no further comments or questions on this at this point, we'll move on ahead to, sorry, I switched screens on myself here. Discussion, still Jamie, discussion of the remaining balance from the drainage and turf project. Sort of
Okay,
a
I hope
continuation.
this one will be quicker, okay? Fun times. So we have a fund balance from the $900,000 that we borrowed on the special warrant article to do the drainage project and update the turf field and surrounding areas. So I had a conversation, I went back after one of our earlier discussions, I think in January, it might have been February, and had a conversation with Renelle Lahoulier, who is the attorney who handled the bond. All bonds in the state of New Hampshire have to be signed off on by a legal opinion of an attorney to say that we followed all New Hampshire RSAs surrounding borrowing money. Okay, so she handled all of that for us. So I went back to her and had the conversation, you know, about some of the questions the board had, about what we could do with the funds. And you can use the funds to pay down the principal, not for the regular payment, but it would be an additional principal payment on the outstanding debt. I did have a question come through earlier this evening about how much that might save us in interest on our loan. If you recall, the loan was actually written for 15 years, but we are going to pay it off in 6. We had to do that because of some funky wording in our Dresden compact. So if we were to pay down approximately, I used the 32,000. If we were to pay down 32,000 on the 6-year payoff stream, it would save approximately, what did I write that down? Approximately $3,800 in interest. Okay, so that's the answer to that question. We also have had looked at, because we knew that the padding that was surrounding the field was aging. I believe it's original. You can ask Justin on that. He can probably update us, or Julie. Most of it, I would say, is original. They might have replaced a few of the pads here and there that may have torn in past years due to weather related issues, maybe. So I did ask Tony to get a quote on the padding. We've not gotten 3, we got 1, you know, because it gives you an idea. Obviously, if we were going to do either one of the proposals, which scoreboard or padding, we will absolutely get 3 quotes because that's what we're required to do our due diligence. I have, in conversations with Tony, been reminded that we had put some money in the regular budget, which on that end of year fiscal report, so this may make your job tonight easier, we did include $26,000 in the Hanover High School budget for site improvements for the area surrounding, whether we were going to use it for fencing or padding or bleachers or a new scoreboard. There was $26,000 that was put into the 1920 budget that we've not spent yet. So I hope maybe that makes your job easier tonight. And Megan did do a very nice write-up about the scoreboard and why they were seeking to replace it. I'm thinking that we could still accommodate that within the regular budgeted funds, and we did when we did the projection include spending out all the site monies that were remaining and the building improvement monies that were remaining.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Board members, do you have questions for Jamie on this? Dan.
Jamie, apologies if I missed this. Wait, so the money that was set aside has to be spent for athletic stuff. Is that true?
Yes, yep, because it was a special warrant article. And so you have to spend it based on that wording that's posted in that warrant article.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
And I think even more specifically, it has to be spent on something to do with the turf field area, right? So it couldn't be spent on gym furnishings or something like that.
Yes, yep, absolutely.
Actually, more to the point, it couldn't be spent on improving the internet related to something in sports, which is because yeah.
Only near the turf field, Dan.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I just.
What about
What it's worth,
esports?
I just have in the back of my head that if the fall is still a problematic time, that we're going to have students who continue to be disadvantaged through technology, and that somehow we're going to have to start to find some way to make that gap up for them. So, but that's a conversation for another time. Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other hands. Megan is available if we need to ask any questions. Oh, sorry, Neil.
Although to be clear, the money doesn't have to be spent.
Yes, thank you. If it's spent, it has to be spent in that area.
Yep.
But it does not have to be spent. And so Jamie, remind us, and I apologize if you said this already, if it's not spent, what happens to it?
You have to spend it. You have to close out the loan. So if you don't spend the funds, then they have to go back against the principal of the loan.
Okay.
Or the public has to vote on using it for a different purpose.
Oh.
Okay, so Rick has a question.
It can't just sit in perpetuity, and it's not a part of the regular general fund, so it doesn't become fund balance.
Okay, thank you. Rick.
So did I hear you right though, Jamie, that we already had set aside funds so we could actually do both the pads and the scoreboard using the bond money and the budgeted money that we already set aside? So
Yes.
So it's really a decision on either giving the money, paying down the principal and doing one of the projects, or doing both of the projects and not paying off the principal. Paying down.
That is my understanding, yes. I had meetings with Tony about the surpluses that were still remaining, not surpluses, but balances in the site improvement line for the Hanover High School. And so we looked at all the different projects that we had originally discussed for 1920. And we've accommodated almost all of the projects, and there's still enough money remaining for us to go out, get 3 quotes on the scoreboard. So you can remove that one. It was part of the original discussion, so I didn't want to remove it without having the discussion with you. Because, you know, there's always things you can do, right? But so yes, Rick, to your point, I think the conversation that you probably want to focus on is whether or not we want to update all the pads right now, update half of the pads, or, you know, a combination thereof, or pay extra on the principal.
I see Neil and then John.
So Jamie, help me understand here. For those monies that were budgeted for facilities updates, are those to what extent are we allowed to redirect those funds if, for example, we were going to use the remaining balance on the loan to cover, for example, either the pads or the scoreboard, because those other site improvement funds be redirected to another line item in the budget?
Could they? Yes, they could be redirected somewhere else if they were needed somewhere else. They were put aside in the site improvement lines, if anybody wants to look back on their budget, for, it said athletic field, fencing, scoreboard, bleachers / repairs. So, you know, it wasn't directed at any one of the specific items. I think it was for a conversation to be had, probably with the athletic director and or Justin, to see, you know, what we could accommodate either within our project, which was where some of the fencing, you know, had to occur around the turf field. And the bleachers, we've taken care of all those within some of the funding, because we had 61,500 set aside or budgeted for 1920 in site improvements. Okay.
Yeah, I guess more broadly though, my question is, if we've got expenses related to the pandemic, could those line items be transferred not just within athletics, but even outside of athletics to cover unanticipated costs related to this pandemic?
If you were in a need, if you had a situation where you had a need, yes, you can transfer funds anywhere, as long as they're not a special warrant article funds, which is what the funds for the project were. But any general fund monies, Neil, you can transfer throughout the entire budget, as long as that budgeted line had money in it to begin with. You can't create a new line and fund it. And we have a policy with regards to transfer of funds. We've not transferred any in this area right now because we've not gone horribly over anywhere.
Sorry, I had to move out of where the kids were going to bed. Thanks, Jamie. John?
I'm not sure my question is super necessary at this moment. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any other questions for Jamie? So to be clear, we are going to be, oh, I see, sorry, I was having to move. I see Kim, Justin, and Tom. We are going to be voting on what to do with these funds momentarily. So Kim.
Yeah, so my question is about kind of, we've been talking about this excess 32,000 or so. And from what I understand of the and using it for funds that fit the definition, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was in the spirit of the warrant article when it was initially proposed. So I guess, and I'm also kind of a bit struggling with the use of surplus, because this is actually $3,000 kind of eaten into contingency budget, right? So in some respects, if we looked at the budget of this warrant article, we really ate into it went $3,000 over, or we ate into our contingency. And then therefore, the only thing that what we're talking about right now is actually just contingency. And so I'm a bit struggling to think, just because I want to be transparent and respecting kind of what voters voted on, you know, whether this is actually surplus that we're talking about, or is this something that should go back to principal because we've completed the project that we had intended to do and what was proposed and what was in the original budget. Is that a fair description of the situation?
Sure.
Thanks, Kim. Justin, and then Tom, and then John.
Thank you. I'll keep it very brief. I just wanted to speak to the need for this. I think from my perspective, during my time here, the pads used to be something we replaced a chunk of them every year. The light, just the UV light, just eats them. Tony, when he came on board, he put the existing covers over the pads so they all look uniform, but and that's been a great solution. But underneath those covers, the pads are really in bad condition, and they're padding over a concrete wall. So out of bounds, there's a stretch of the turf field, and then there's that concrete retaining wall. So really, I would say, you know, I hear Kim's point, and I would say there's a sort of a neatness in my perspective to, you know, making the turf field what it should be, and kind of bringing it up to, you know, correcting the drainage, fixing the turf field. I really see pads and the scoreboard as and updating those things as really completing that project as a whole. The scoreboard certainly is not a safety issue. It's really just simply outdated and hard to maintain. So the reason that those two pieces of that project are out there has to do with the datedness of the scoreboard and the fact that it's very sport specific. It's a football scoreboard, and which is one of many sports we play there. And then the pads are in very poor condition. So that's it. That's all I want to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Tom?
I think Justin's getting a little bit to my question, and maybe it'd be good to hear from Megan too, but it was with regard to me that sounds like obviously the pads are a safety issue. So in terms of the remaining from the Warren article, it would seem like that would make sense to spend the money on. The scoreboard is a question for me, and especially looking into next year as to whether or not we should just keep those funds in surplus and potentially have use for them later. But that, I think, gets back to what Neil and Jamie were talking about, and the ability to use those funds in future years. That's, I guess, another question to Jamie, but the possibility of that in the surplus and the rollover and the retainage and that sort of thing.
So you can't take fund balance from this year and use it for expenditures next year in New Hampshire. It has to become part of fund balance where you either A, let it go back against assessment, or B, vote it as part of retainage.
Right, and so I was thinking it would keep the retainage, the opportunity for the retainage amount to be higher if we kept that to the side and for future.
Yep, you could.
Okay.
You could, and just so I had a discussion. I'm sad she's not here, but with Kari Asmus, as she was very involved in some of the conversations when we went through the discussion about updating this. I think it was a year ago. It's probably 2 years ago now. And so we did briefly have a discussion, and she had concurred, or so I thought, about the pads surrounding the turf field when we were discussing the original project and its needs. At that point in time, we did not up the project by that dollar amount, because you always hope that you can bring a project in under budget, right? And therefore not have to finance, more money for other pieces that you can hopefully make change orders, which we did. We made, I think, 4 or 5 change orders throughout this project, which ended up, whether you want to call it saving us money or not, or the project went over and the contingency didn't. Contingency is part of a project. When you do $1 million or $5 million project, you put contingency in there because you can't know every single little thing that you're gonna, that's gonna happen. That's underground, or in the wall, or in the ceiling, or anywhere else. So I mean, we had that in the back of our mind, that it was discussed a bit at the meeting where we talked about financing and options. And so here we are. Perhaps we can try to do a little of both. I don't know. It's you can do whatever you feel is correct.
So I'm looking at the vote wording, and it says that we're basically going to approve the spending of the remaining funds, right? And so my question to you, Jamie, is can we approve the spending of the remaining funds for just pads or for just safety equipment, or I mean, can we put a condition on that and then say any remaining goes back in, or is this an all or nothing? You got to spend it all the way down or not at all?
Well, we need to close the fund because it's a special revenue fund. So you need to vote to do something with the total dollar amount remaining. You can absolutely split it. You can say, do $16,000 worth of pads and return 16 against the principal. You can do 20 and 12. I mean, you can do whatever makes sense for, what you think needs to be done.
So in the interest of moving us along, we are going to come back to vote on this in just a moment. Actually, it's coming right up. But I personally would propose, since I think it is in the wording, as I interpret it, to update the turf area. That's part of the bond wording. To me, this is within that. And I think the safety issue, to me, of kids not running into a concrete wall is important. And so personally, I propose that we consider approving the spending of those additional funds to the point that it makes it safe for people to play on those fields, and trust our administration and our athletic director to make that determination, since I don't know if that's $16,000 or $18,500, or that would be my proposal.
And you'd want to put a statement about any remaining funds go back against the principal, because this is only one quote.
Right.
We would hope that we could, if we were going to do that, if you all found that that was the right thing, that we would absolutely try to get it as reasonable as possible.
Neil?
Kelly, I would just say, I think under normal circumstances, I would absolutely support this. I have strong reservations about the financial situation of the education fund in Vermont, and fully acknowledge that if we're talking about like $3,800 over the life of the loan, that this is really peanuts. And the reason that I asked my question before was whether or not we could actually use the money, the remaining balance here, to defer spending from a line item that was already in the budget, or to put that towards some other need. I'm just a little uncomfortable with all the moving parts that sort of would need to be in place for me to see that happen. I guess that what I'm saying is, at this point in time, I'm not convinced that that's the best use of the remaining funds, and it probably should just go back to principal.
Ben?
I apologies if this was said, but did we get a sense of how long these pads would last if they were put in terms of the life of the loan that was mentioned in the attorney's opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do believe that either pieces of equipment would, so the life of the loan,
You said it was 6 years, right?
right, we're going to pay it off in 6 years. It's written for 15 because of the wording, that we dealt with. I don't know if you're on the board then, Ben, so I apologize if you weren't, but it was last September. But right, we will be paying it off in 6 years. I think Justin can probably, and I believe most of the pads that are down there are original and are probably approaching 14 years old.
So, Justin, is that the recommended lifespan, or do we have a sense of the official lifespan for these things?
I don't.
May I jump in, Kelly? So the pads are not original. They've been replaced many times. They don't last long, minus the cover. The kind of breakthrough we've had that Tony has helped us with is, I'm not sure what the fabric is, but he has installed these fabric covers over the pads. The pads themselves, we've tried lots of different manufacturers. After a year, maybe two, they are shredded from the ultraviolet light. But the cover has helped. So I would say, with the cover, we'd be in a good position for the pads to last well. I wouldn't be able to say that before we had this cover in place.
It's sunbrella fabric. It covers boats, so it's good for ultraviolet stuff.
Okay.
I don't know why they don't make the pads out of that themselves, but whatever they make is useless.
It's probably not as soft. Kim?
Jamie, can you remind me if we were able to meet the debt payment structure in the end? I know there was some back and forth on what we were legally able to do back last September or whenever it was, and just wanted to make sure that we were able to not have any particular year that was higher than what we had anticipated. If that question isn't clear, I'm sorry, it's almost 10 o'clock.
No, I think I know what you're saying. And so we had said we would have debt that was retiring in order to meet the correct dollar amount of payments that we were originally projecting without raising assessment. Correct? That's what you mean.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, we have met that, so we did not have to increase assessments.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can let Megan in here. Josh, if you can let Megan in. She's over in the attendees. Yep, here she comes. Thank you, Josh. Hi, Megan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Oh, I'm not sure how to turn on my video, but okay, that's okay. It's 10 o'clock at night. No one needs to see me. I've been waiting for 3 hours to say something. So I just want to advocate for the scoreboard replacement. My understanding of the bond article was that it was for upgrades to the turf facility, I think is how it reads. The scoreboard is 14 years old, and it has a lifespan of about 15 years. So this is going to need to be done sooner rather than later. But I think more importantly, the scoreboard is a football only scoreboard. It works for other sports, but it certainly is not ideal for other sports. And I think we have to remember we play about 5 home football games on it a year versus the number of soccer, field hockey, and lacrosse games that we play. Yet the scoreboard reads, ball on, down. It doesn't read saves for a soccer game or lacrosse game or field hockey game. So, that was what was done in 2006, but, 14 years later, times have changed, and the turf field is home to many of our teams, not just football. And so I think given that it's going to be replaced very soon, I would advocate for using the remaining funds to do that.
Thanks, Megan. And Megan has put a letter in our board docs for anyone who wants to read where she sort of elaborated on that. It is 10 o'clock. In the interest of moving us forward a little bit, I'm going to ask you guys to kind of think about the numbers. You have them. So we're looking at essentially with what's left in that fund balance, either the 28,000-ish for pads or the 32,000-ish for scoreboard, which would essentially draw down that fund more or less, right? If I'm not oversimplifying, or sending it back to fund balance. Yep, Garrett?
Yeah, this is a little frustrating, making a decision on this. I mean, we can only do one or the other, right? There's not enough money to buy them both. They're both about 30,000. There's about 30,000 left. So I just don't really understand how right now, it sounds like, I'm hearing from Justin that there's a major safety issue with these pads, yet I'm also hearing that we need a scoreboard. So I guess the question is it sounds like, or we just put the money back in, right? So unfortunately, there's no good answer here. It's kind of hard to, and we haven't really had any recommendations outside from anybody other than Megan, who jumped on this call, and then Justin, who it sounds like, it's not 100% confirmed, but his theory is that the pads are basically all gone. So I guess the question is there a better way to make a decision about this than just voting on it tonight and spending the 30 grand in the next 5 minutes, or?
Jamie?
So I know it's late and I apologize for the confusion. There is money in the regular general fund budget to cover updating the scoreboard. Okay. So if I didn't make that clear, I'm sorry. There is still money in the site improvement line that can be used to update the scoreboard. So really, and if you can't make the decision tonight, you can push it off another month. But
I think, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just think, and to Neil's point, so we are in unprecedented times, right? So I think budgets don't have to be spent, I think is kind of the mantra right now. And we just don't know what, I mean, things are continually getting worse and worse and worse here, and this is for both sides of the river, right? As far as ability to pay property taxes, I mean, things are gonna get a lot worse before they get better. So anyways, I think just kind of just all raising our hands here with kind of, I don't really feel like I've got good information on what's really needed. It's just kind of, this is a tricky one, right?
So Jamie, to that point, do we have a time frame? I know we've punted this now 2 months in a row, which is why I kind of thought maybe we need to have the conversation.
No, you can, if you want another month or two. I believe that, let's see, I think you have up until a year to close that fund out from the last paid out bill. So no, you don't. It's just, it'd be nice to close it by the end of this fiscal year if we had a direction.
Yeah, I think we need to, and sorry to interrupt, I mean, obviously the safety issue is a big one. I mean, if someone runs into this wall and splits their head open, we've got a much bigger problem on our hands than a $30,000 problem. We probably have a big problem. So that seems to be what this seems to be where that needs to go, is it's a safety issue first. Scoreboard, nice to have, but I guess I still haven't really heard that it's it sounds like it's a little bit theoretical what in poor shape these pads are and how often they need to be replaced and all that. So anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Yep, Jamie?
So I'm going to suggest we table this, and I'm going to go back with Tony, and we're going to get you better information, and we'll come back in May.
Or they're even better pads, or I feel better spending the 30 grand if we knew there was these, maybe a better pad solution that wasn't going to be needed to be replaced every year, or it's kind of
Or maybe
together through a cockamamie sun umbrella cover or something.
I'll just add to that, if we could get the multiple quotes for the pads, that would probably be helpful, since it sounds like board members are more leaning that direction if we're going to spend this down more towards the safety issue. So that would be helpful, I think, to get multiple quotes for that. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, moving on to school board committees. This will be very quick. I'm going to run down what I have currently for committees, and if you want to make a change, please tell me if you want to be on the committee or not on the committee. Otherwise, I'm going to assume we're going to keep going with the same committees, and then we may need to add some people, and I'll let you know where those are. So for budget, I have Kim and Tom. Okay. For athletic advisory, I have John. For negotiations, I think that's Tom and Neil. Is that correct? Yes, sort of, kind of. Yes. Okay.
No, Kelly, I'm not on Dresden's side. I do the Norwich one. If someone else would like to take Dresden, not that I don't enjoy working with Neil on it.
Just a second. Okay, so then in that case, I don't know that I have anyone on negotiations for Dresden right now. Not that I could find on board docs. For CSDC liaison, I have Dan. For NHSBA liaison, that's me. For evaluation committee, I have Neil, and we weren't quite sure, Neil, what that was. I'm not sure if that was principal evaluation.
Nope.
Compensation?
So that was we had an agreement during the last round of negotiations that the faculty and the administration would get together to discuss teacher evaluations to feed the next round of negotiations. It's an ongoing committee that I've been participating with Jay and some other administrators.
So it is ongoing. Okay.
It is ongoing.
And then CPP, which is the Committee on Policies and Procedures at the high school, and we have a liaison for that, which is currently vacant. And then we also have a council liaison, and I believe that is Rick. Yes. Okay, so I don't know if I missed any committees. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you guys to send me your committee interests, unless someone has a pressing thing they want to mention right now. Okay.
Ben was your other negotiations committee member.
Yeah.
Ben, okay. Okay. Great. Okay, so Ben is on negotiations. Thank you. I didn't see that online. Yep, Kim?
And also, I don't recall if you say this, but we actually have 3 Dresden budget committee members. So Rick was our 3rd.
Okay, I did not see that online either. Okay, super. I was trying to pull this all off of board docs. So, okay, great. And Rick, Kim, Tom, are you good continuing in the Dresden budget committee? Yes, thumbs up all around. Awesome. Okay, any other changes? to mention? Great. Thank you, guys. That was very efficient. I will need someone to think about CPP. I've done that in the past. If you have questions about it, shoot me an email if you're interested in that. It's a fascinating committee where you get to be involved with a bunch of teachers and students and a lot of the, on the ground conversations that are happening around in-school policy at the high school. So it's a great committee. Okay, moving on then to staff appreciation. Jay, I don't know if you had something you wanted to tee up with this. Oh, sorry, I missed Tom's liaison position. Can I pause? Yeah, pause for 1 second. Tom actually also mentioned the Hartford Tech liaison position, which Kelly had been covering. Kelly, are you good covering that still?
Completely fine with that, yep.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Jay, take it away.
All right. We had talked about, I say we, administratively, were talking about doing something for our staff appreciation whenever we were able to get our staff back. We have the ice cream truck on hold. Right now they're tentatively looking at August, sort of back to the beginning of the school year. And then we thought of doing something more amenable to the remote system that we're working with right now in the meantime. But I saw a lot of traffic today amongst our administrators about doing something to pull everyone together around staff appreciation. And we would have to pull it together rather quickly, but there are some places that are doing things like sending flowers to staff, or in fact, one of the things we saw today was like a candle sent around to every employee, and at the same time we all light them. But trying to figure out some way to show our staff how much we appreciate them. Something other than having people show up for our fun ice cream truck.
Great. If I can get a head nod from the board to maybe do a 4 chairs to finalize these decisions, would that be okay with the board?
We talked about a letter, Kelly.
Yep.
I think, a heartfelt letter, like I said before, the Governor Sununu sent one to all educators, and regardless of your political persuasion, it was a nice letter, and it was, I think it was important that he did that. I think that would be something we should do no matter what.
Right.
And then if we think of something else we can do to send people, or some other token of appreciation, I think it'd be great.
Awesome. It looked like I got head nods for 4 chairs kind of finalizing that. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys very much. And to be very clear, I know it's late, and I don't want to appear that we're rushing through staff appreciation, because we appreciate you so much. So please don't interpret that any other way. Okay, that takes us to business requiring action. And I know that we have some students still kind of hanging on to see the outcome of the vote regarding grading. So if the board is amenable, I would love to just move that first. If you refresh, it's now at letter J in your in the agenda. So if you want to refresh, Jay has crafted some wording for the motion there. And if you guys are okay with doing that one first, I would love to kick off with that one, and then we'll go back up to the top. So if someone is willing to make a motion for Jay. Ben?
Move to approve the administration's recommendation to adopt a credit, no credit grading system at Hanover High School for 4th quarter and 2nd semester for the 2019-20 school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. Is there a second? John, thank you. Any questions or any last discussion? Okay. I will take a roll call vote, starting with Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett?
Garrett, yes.
Ben, sorry.
Keeney, yes.
Rick?
Johnson, yes.
John?
Hunt, yes.
Lisa?
Christy, yes.
Marcella?
DeBlasi, yes.
Odell, or sorry, Neil. I apologize.
Odell, yes.
Kelly,
Hersey, yes.
Tom,
Camden, yes.
Dan,
Dan, you're muted.
Yes, yes.
and Connell, yes. So it is unanimous. And again, thank you to everyone who put so much time and effort into making sure that we're making the right decisions or the best possible decisions that we can given the circumstances for our high schoolers. Moving back up to the top, acceptance of gift for engineering opinion. Rick, sorry.
Move to accept the engineering report completed by Pathways Consulting as presented.
Okay, and a second, John. Yeah. And did we need any further discussion on this? No? Okay. I will take a roll call vote, starting with Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett.
Garrett, yes.
Ben.
Heaney, yes.
Rick.
Johnson, yes.
John.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa.
Christie, yes.
Marcella.
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil.
Odell, yes.
Kelly.
Hersey, yes.
Tom.
I'm going to say yes, but can I ask a quick question? Can we start using the hand raise function to make this go faster in the sidebar? Is that allowed?
Is that allowed? I thought we had to do roll call.
You have to do roll call.
Oh, okay. Yes, then, and forget my suggestion.
To be clear, this is not a Kelly call. Dan.
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Okay. Approval of the 2021 tuition rate. Rick, do you want to just keep going on these?
Sure.
Okay.
Move to approve the 2021 tuition rates for Richmond Middle School in the amount of $23,122 and Hanover High School in the amount of $20,888 as presented.
Second. John, thank you. Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett.
Garrett, yes.
Ben.
Heaney, yes.
Rick.
Johnson, yes.
John.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa.
Christie, yes.
Marcella.
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil.
Odell, yes.
Kelly.
Hersey, yes.
Tom.
Camden, yes.
Dan.
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Okay. Policy DFA.
Move to approve DFA investments as presented.
John, second, Ben. Okay. Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett.
Garrett, yes.
Ben.
Heaney, yes.
Rick.
Johnson, yes.
John.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa.
Christie, yes.
Marcella.
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil.
Odell, yes.
Kelly.
Hersey, yes.
Tom.
Camden, yes.
And Dan.
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Approval of expenditures.
Move to approve expenditures from March 20th, 2020 to April 24th, 2020 in the amount of $2,461,485.14 as presented.
Second. John, thank you. Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett.
Garrett, yes.
Ben.
Heaney, yes.
Rick.
Johnson, yes.
John.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa.
Christie, yes.
Marcella, sorry.
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil.
Odell, yes.
Kelly.
Hersey, yes.
Tom.
Camden, yes.
Dan.
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Moving on to general assurances.
Move to approve the 2021 general assurances as presented.
Second. John, thank you. Kim.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett.
Garrett, yes.
Ben.
Heaney, yes.
Rick.
Johnson, yes.
John.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa.
Christie, yes.
Marcella.
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil.
Odell, yes.
Kelly.
Hersey, yes.
Tom.
Camden, yes.
And Dan.
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Approval of minutes for March 17th.
Move to approve the March 17th, 2020 minutes as presented.
Second? Kim?
Hartman,
right.
yes.
Excellent. Garrett?
Garrett, yes.
Ben?
Keeney, yes.
I don't actually have to say your names in between, so if you want to like follow the person, you can. Rick?
Johnson, yes.
Hunt,
John?
yes.
Lisa?
Chrissy, yes.
Marcella?
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil?
Odell, yes.
Kelly?
Percy, yes.
Tom?
Cannon, yes.
Dan?
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Almost there, guys. Approval of non-public minutes.
Move to approve the March 17th, 2020 non-public minutes as presented.
Kim, second. Thank
Second,
you.
Hartman, yes.
Garrett?
yes.
Ben?
Or there might be discussion.
Keeney, yes.
Johnson, yes.
John?
Hunt, yes.
Lisa?
Christy, yes.
Marcella?
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil?
Odell, yes.
Percy, yes.
Tom?
Cannon, yes.
Dan?
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Approval of policies. These are policies that we have seen and approved in other meetings.
Move to approve DAF, Administration of Federal Grant Funds, and IJOA, field trips and excursions as presented.
Is there a second? Ben? Kim?
Hartman, yes.
Garrett?
Yes.
Keeney, yes.
Rick?
Johnson, yes.
Hunt, yes.
Lisa?
Christy, yes.
Marcella?
DeBlasi, yes.
Neil?
Odell, yes.
Percy,
Kelly?
yes.
Cannon, yes.
Dan?
Rockmore, yes.
And McConnell, yes. Okay, and we are tabling I, the approval of spending for the remaining fund balance of the drainage. So that concludes our business requiring action. I have nothing to report except to say another profound thank you to all of our administrators and staff and parents and families and everyone, students who are doing such a wonderful job in these unprecedented times. So thank you again, everyone. Our next meeting will be online, I presume, May 26th, so it's Tuesday, May 26th at 7 o'clock, I believe. We'll maintain that time. So look for the Zoom link for that. Jay?
I really hope that you'll forgive me for simply thanking you all for the hours you put in, and for all of our staff for flexing so much during this time and allowing that to suffice for my report tonight. Okay.
Well played.
Jamie, try to beat that.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to jump ahead of you, Jamie, real quickly, just to say, Tom just
Thank you,
reminded
Jay.
me, I just completely skipped over the agenda template for next year's meeting. So if you have any comments on that, please just send them my way. You have the document there. So please send me any comments. Thanks, Tom. Apologies for skipping over that. Jamie.
Okay, food service running lovely. I want to big shout out to Pete and Jerry's Organic Eggs. They've been unbelievable in donating eggs to people in need. Also, Ramunto's here in Hanover has been donating, I know. So that's going well. People are happy. Transportation, we'll have more savings coming out of the changes that are going on right now within STA's ranks. Buildings and grounds, I won't report on tonight because it's too long. I'll bring it back to you in May. Everything's fine. And the Dresden MS-22 has been filed with the DRA. We checked with them. They'll accept electronic signatures for this one and Hanover's. I just have to figure out how to get that done.
That's pretty good. All right. Thank you, Jamie. And
Hey, Kelly, can I ask a question?
Please, Lisa.
Yeah, sorry. Is there a way we can recognize the people who are donating anything to the district? I mean, just on the board. I mean, assuming the district is sending something out, but I didn't know Ramonto's was donating pizza or that Pete and Jerry's was donating eggs. And I just, people would like to know something on the website, or I don't know, just
It's on the website.
who's giving above and beyond.
Thanks. That's a great suggestion. Yeah, Jamie.
I thought the Pete and Jerry's was on the website already. If it's not, I'll have it posted, but I thought we posted it under either the COVID or the food page. I may be wrong. Ramunto's just happened, so we haven't had a chance to do that.
It may be on the website. I have to admit at this point off any screen that I don't absolutely have to be on. So I probably missed it.
Thank you. Good point, though.
Looks like Kelly's frozen.
Uh-oh.
So we're waiting for Kelly to join. I just wanted to point out what Lisa was just mentioning. I don't think we take advantage of the Valley News as much as Lebanon School District does. And I don't know if maybe taking an article or an ad out, not that expensive, but thanking whoever we want to thank for helping support our school kids and our staff may make sense.
Rick, I love that idea, and I know the Valley News could advertising money right now, so it helps a local organization as well.
Great, duly noted.
So while we're waiting for, oh, Kelly's back.
I'm back. The internet fairies worked their magic. So what did I miss? Are we ready to move to non-public? Yes. Brilliant. Have we done the motion? No. Okay, so I will take a motion to enter non-public then.
Okay, now we are going to I'm going to have to send a link for a non-public. Josh, are you still with us?
I am.
Josh, is it possible for you to send just the participants a new link for the non-public session?
Sure.
Can we do the motion and the vote and all that?
I'll work on that while you guys do the motion and stuff. Gracie, I need you to get up.
Move to enter into non-public session under RSA 91-A:3C personnel.
Thank you. Is there a second, John? Thank you very much. And a roll call vote. Y'all are in different orders for me now. I apologize. Dan?
Rockmore, yes.
Did it kick me out again?
No.
Nah, you're good now. Hunt, yes.
Garrett, yes.
Johnson, yes.
Camden, yes.
Keeney, yes.
Christy, yes.
Kelly Hersey?
Hersey, yes. I was going in the order as before. Yes, Hersey, yes.
Odell, yes.
Hartman, yes.
At this point, anyone who hasn't said yes yet.
McConnell, yes. Sorry. I think it's Star Trek's fault in the other room.
Okay.
Okay, so what's going to happen now is Josh is going to be sending us each a link. And Josh?
Yes.
All the participants that we currently have, less Julie Stevenson,
Okay.
would be included in the executive session because I think Justin will be there to be able to talk about some of the FTE situations there, and then Tim Boyle as well on the RMS personnel
Okay.
matters.
All
And
right.
then just to remind everyone, I have one student matter to talk about.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do is send everybody a link. I'm going to use email and just send everybody a link to the meeting instead of typing it into Zoom for private invitations. And then I'll send it out to everybody through email if that's okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you to everyone who attended and the public as well.
we'll need to come back into public session, so this will get a little wonky, but we'll need to vote on these appointments.
I can leave this running. I'll leave
Okay,
this running.
great. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna jump out to email.
So we leave the meeting now, right?
And then we come back in.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Jay. That's kind of a bizarre situation.
Yeah, check your email. We're going to jump into the other meeting.
Okay, cool.
Going into non-public. Where is it?
Yeah, I don't have it.
Well, I think we have to leave the.
Still working on it. I have to write down I have to get the emails out of the old one and enter each of the emails.
Oh, okay.
So it's just going to take me a minute, and then I'll get it out.
All right. Yeah, I my whole thing crashed right before this, so I was worried.
I'm not seeing. I guess I'm out of the other meeting. I know we're still talking.
Yeah.
I didn't leave the meeting, but I can't find my meeting now. It's weird.
Should Anissa be on the list?
No, I think she's. I think she's done. She's
Yeah,
out.
it's her birthday.
Okay.
Yeah. She
Right,
only
almost
worked
done.
Only worked like 14 hours today, so we might as well give her the time off.
And we still are recording, and it's still broadcasting to YouTube on this one.
Okay.
I can't, for some reason, I can't find my Zoom window.
I can kick you out if you want.
Yeah, and then I'll go. Then I guess I can go back in. Go ahead and kick me out.
All right.
Janice is saying they can
try.
still hear us.
Yep.
All right, I'm leaving. Bye.
Josh, am I out?
Come on, let's go. Damn it. All right, fine. So I need to leave.